mean to kill him. She hit him. Strengths. It is a plain and strong likelihood of death. You would never back down your driveway if your kids were at the end of the driveway. You'd say, well, you're going to kill somebody? You would never do it because you would expect, if you drove at them at that speed, that someone would die. That's second-degree murder. OUI manslaughter, she's drunk, she was reckless. She doesn't have to know she hit him. She doesn't even have to know she hit him. But she did. She did. And she left a man who was kind and generous and thoughtful. She left him alone. She left him alone to die. Could I have slide 22, please? He is not an it. John O'Keefe is not a body. John O'Keefe was not a buffalo on a prairie. John O'Keefe was a person, and he was murdered by Karen Reed.
Take it. Thank you. All right, jurors. The next step is my instructions to you on the law. I'm not going to do that right now. You've been sitting for a long time. So I do have to tell you, even though you've just heard the closing argument, you cannot discuss this case even with each other. All right, so we'll send you back for lunch. It's going to be a shorter lunch. My instructions are long, and we want you to be able to get this case to start deliberations today. So I'm going to send you back maybe about a half an hour. Is that enough time for you folks? All right, so we'll give you a half an hour for lunch, and then we'll come back. I'll give you my instructions on the law, and then the jurors will go out to deliberate. I know there are 18 of you. We seat only 12 deliberating jurors. 6 of you are going to be all. Just tell you that you know the odds, right? I can tell you it's Mr. McDermott's least favorite part of his job is spelling. So we'll do that this afternoon. Do not discuss this case. See you tomorrow.
I'll let you guys respond. I did hear both of them, but obviously you guys have been here all morning, so I'll go last. You guys can respond to what you guys saw.
That was an emotional
Yeah.
statement. It's just it's very loaded, not to be, but to hear the things that we have collectively
Can I
been
see you
saying.
just a second?
Oh,
Hold on. Get my.
not sure if they're done yet.
I think she was just seeing counsel for a second.
But to hear the things that we have all collectively been, the truth, really, the truth laid out so eloquently, and it was so easy to follow. I mean, I don't know. That was an incredible closing statement. And when you lay it out bare like that, down to, you know, what you can glean about her state of mind, which Kevin, I know you heard, but Hank Brennan apparently agrees with me with that. It's setting in that drunken denial, right? I love what he called it that. I was never able to pin it down to words like that, but that feeling of, you know, I think I might have done something, and then realizing that you have as you're sober. Yeah.
I thought it was the best closing argument I've ever seen.
Yeah, I was at a loss for
I mean
words
it.
for a minute. I mean, just that was powerful. That's an understatement. Amazing.
You know, for me, I didn't watch the first trial. I didn't see the closing arguments or the opening arguments or any of those things in between in the last trial. For me, this one, it was super impactful, you know, and he kind of cleared up some of the things that I had been arguing, you know, when I was saying, like, for instance, you know, nobody knows where you are, you know, in those clips. He was able to tie that in as far as, you know, her having knowledge that she hit him. And then he tied in something that didn't dawn on me until he talked about it. And that was that, you know, she calls Jen McCabe and says that she left him at the waterfall. And she said, "What are you talking about? I saw you outside." And she immediately hangs up and calls somebody else. And the story at that point immediately changes. I thought that was brilliant, the way he tied all that in on how she was aware that she struck him.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's been, and as for Kate, a long road, and a long, lonely road at many times, especially early on.
Yeah.
I remember times on this channel when my audience had shrunk down to about 15 or 20 people, and I no longer had co-hosts or anybody, and now I've got this great group of people working with me, like you guys. So I'm so appreciative, and especially to Kate, who's been with me now for a long time. But that was a 10 out of 10. But we should also mention too. So we have starting before that, we get the closing argument from Jackson, which was in its own way brilliant. However, it was a work of fiction based on completely at every point on half truths. Nonetheless, to people that don't understand that, every point, even just to the fact of why didn't the Alberts come out of the house that morning? I mean, that's something that impressed a lot of people as we first were looking at this case. But when you look at it longer and realize that there were no sirens and this howling wind that would have absorbed all that noise, and these people were sound asleep, and the first cop inside the house was there to see them coming down the stairs, and it was clear to him that they had just woken up. All this stuff, you realize it's all built on half truths, but it was effective enough that it needed to be followed by a perfect performance. And it was. Hank hit every note perfectly, including debunking he didn't spend too much time trying to debunk the statements at the closing arguments of Alan Jackson, but he did just enough, and he perfectly debunked them, while at the same time laying out the factual base of the state's case that leaves no other room for anything else, and got in the emotional aspects of it, and properly portrayed Karen as someone who's not only someone that just made a mistake here, but has done a lot of things that are evil. He obviously didn't use that words like that, but he portrayed it in a way to the jury where they would see, here's someone that made decisions at every point. There were times she could have saved John, and she never once thought, she's always, at every step, she thought of herself first. And so I thought it was just perfect in every way. Sorry about that long-winded thing. And thank you guys for being here all day.
No, I agree entirely. The emotional impact of it, even the way that he framed and handled Proctor, we didn't need him. He got his accountability. That doesn't negate that she needs hers,
Mm-hmm. Margaret, how does this compare to other closing statements, arguments that you've heard particularly from Hank? Because you were there for the big trial, Whitey. I don't know. Did Hank do the closing for that, or did the other attorney do that?
Oh my God, I think Hank did. I have to check my book.
Right, because there was a pretty famous other attorney there.
Carney. Yeah,
Carney.
Yeah. I thought Hank did it, but I could be wrong. It's been a while now, but I'd like to go over some points, legal points that I saw. We can all talk about it. First of all, hands down, I think that was the best closing argument I've ever seen. And that's saying something.
Yeah.
Because I also, not only did I see a lot of closing arguments in my own cases, but I taught part of my class at Boston College was my law class was teaching trial practice. So I would show them bits and pieces of the trial, closing arguments, opening statements of what I thought were really good ones, like in the Hernandez case and all that. And hands down, this one was incredible. But I think Jackson did a few good things as well, and a few bad things. If we want to go over, how do you want to do it? How do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean,
should we hit Jackson for? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Well, I don't know. What do you guys want to do?
Anybody who wants to jump in.
Either way.
Well, okay.
First, can we discuss why the defense closed first?
That's because the prosecution has the burden of proof, and the prosecution always goes last. So in the opening statement, the defense always goes first, prosecution second, closing argument, it's the opposite. So because Hank has the burden of proof, he goes last.
Okay. I wasn't aware of that. I didn't know. I was
a lot of people don't know that. Yeah, it's nice to have the last word. Yep. It really is an advantage to have the last word. One of the things that I thought, again, being objective here, because obviously I think Hank did an amazing job, being objective as to Jackson's closing argument. He's a great orator, as we all know. I thought one of the areas was when he pointed out the holes in John's shirt. It was a strong argument showing that, supporting his theme that there was no collision, because you would think if he had all those injuries on the arm and they were caused by the taillight. You would think there would be more holes in John's shirt. But one thing I didn't like at all is when I think he went over the top when he pointed out that, he basically said that Brennan perpetuated a fraud on the jurors with his mistake of holding that long sleeve T-shirt up and saying, "Oh, look at the holes in the back of the shirt." It was, I do believe it was a mistake, but if jurors like Brennan, some of the jurors, they may not like that at all, because that was sort of dirty pool. What do you guys think?
Well, I think there was no way a defense attorney was not going to use that. I mean, that's
But to say he's perpetuating a fraud, I
Right.
thought that was above and beyond. I would use it if I were Jackson, but I wouldn't use those words. It was unintentional. It was obvious it was unintentional.
Right. Well,
What do you
I
think?
guess I would go ahead. Anybody wants to go? Sorry, I only jump in if there's like 6 seconds of silence.
After watching Hank, a lot of what Jackson said kind of went out the window. I was just so in tune with what Hank was saying. I couldn't imagine, much of the jury probably, or I could imagine a lot of the jury probably feeling the same way with how awesome he was at the points. One of the things that sparked my attention is when Jackson was going through his closing arguments, he brought up the 227 search. I don't remember them bringing anybody up to validate that. I thought they didn't have anybody to come up and validate that.
That's a good point. There was a lot of moments where he seemed to bring up things that came out in the first trial that really I didn't remember coming out in this trial. But yeah, go ahead, guys.
It came out in the trial with Jen McCabe's direct testimony. He asked her about it.
Right,
So he could argue it because it came up there, but they had no expert to say that it didn't occur at 6:30, and obviously they didn't bring on Richard Green, their own expert, but all he could go on was his cross-examination questions to Jen McCabe, which delved into that area.
Right.
And he did.
Can you guys think of any areas that Hank missed that you wanted him to go into? Any piece? Because there's obviously a lot of evidence that you're never going to go into all of it. So is there something particular you guys thought was important that he decided to skip over? For instance, I was kind of surprised. I was pleased but surprised that he mentioned that he decided to mention how Barrows made that trip to the Omni Hotel, really kind of calling into question Barrows' motives here. I thought it was effective because if you do it with one witness like that, who looks in other ways to be honest and impressive, that calls into question the other witnesses too, and what their motives are.
That was a good move.
I thought so.
Yeah. And he really, anybody who thought that Barrows was any good, I don't know what they're watching, because he completely just, as I've said all along, he completely destroyed Barrows on the stand with that. Right. And he explained it again in his in his closing argument. He had to.
Barrows undid his own testimony when he agreed with the last photograph of the taillight. That was a lock. That was a lock. Yeah. I appreciated Hank's focus on the data, his balance of focusing on the timeline, the data, and then leaving it on an emotional level instead of intertwining it with drama like Jackson did. I thought was very, very well done.
He even displayed a little bit of empathy towards the defendant, which I thought was incredible to watch.
You are muted.
What do you guys think about the way Hank explained Murder 2, and do you think that the jury, how do you think that's going to go with the jury?
Yeah, it's so funny. We both got to talk at the same time, and I was just, my comment was just going to be, I thought that was like a brilliant explanation.
Brilliant.
Just as I was,
clean.
Just as I was saying that, you were asking the question, but yeah, that was great.
I love the boulder, the boulder reference, because it's the exact same thing. You throw a boulder right off an expressway bridge right down in a car. Yeah, there's a strong likelihood that it will kill somebody, and that is second-degree murder. And that was the easiest way to explain it. I have been explaining that to people for 2 years because they're so stuck on intent. But I over and over and over, I had to explain it last night, like to my friends. I'm like, no, you don't understand. It's all about the act. Did she intend the act? So he did a brilliant job with that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I thought he did an amazing job. I've been telling people, I was like, if you were intoxicated in those weather conditions and you pop it in reverse, hit the throttle at 70% in the direction of somebody, any reasonable person would come to a degree of certainty that could cause death. And I thought he explained it well. And that example that he used was perfect as well. Because, that is something that I think a lot of people do stick on is, well, it can't be murder because there was no intent. And I think it's just they don't understand the rules there. It's kind of like in Idaho, where they say that Bryan Kohberger wasn't stalking the victims because in Idaho, the law for stalking, you have to be aware that you're being followed, and none of them were. And so they use that loose definition, or that definition of what the rule is there and how it doesn't fit the exact law, and try to manipulate it and to fit their narrative. And I see that in this case too.
Yeah. Someone
I spent
asked
a lot of time.
Okay.
Go
ahead.
No, I just say I spent a lot of time, particularly in Alan Jackson's moment in his closing, watching Peg O'Keefe, and that moved me more than anything. Just seeing, but also during when Hank was describing how John died, just seeing the times when she was wiping the tears from her face and stuff, and it's just reminds you what this case is about. A lot of things, but at the end of the day, that's a big part of what it's about. And actually, I want to ask Kate this too. I was texting Kate during Hank's closing, and I said, this is perfect. And she texted back, yeah, I'm crying watching this. But so just going back to Kate's journey, which is a little different than mine, but since the beginning of this case and how she first started to get into it, all the different things could lead to the emotion after watching Jackson's pretty effective closing. And then seeing just how powerful you needed that perfect reply by Hank, and you were getting it. What are the various things that were feeding your emotion, Kate, as you were taking that in? What was on your mind?
Well, it's just so. I guess it's just. I imagine it must be such a relief for the family, and it's so hard to It's a feeling of vindication, first of all, when you're hearing someone repeat the things that you have been saying this entire time, progressively for 2 years, at some points completely alone. And I really appreciated when you came over, Kevin, but it is what it is. I live with it. I've always endured a ton of abuse online. I will continue to after this. It's just sort of the nature of what I choose to do, as I was discussing earlier. But it is grating after a while, and to have this moment where everything is laid out by a brilliant man like Hank Brennan so eloquently and so strongly in front of a jury, on national television. It just, and to know that the family can sit there and listen and know that they can trust this guy, they're in no better hands, and to hear the truth, right? Just unassailable. Everything that I think everybody has wanted to hear said was said, at least that understands that she's guilty. I just hope that I hope that it does it. I really do, and at some points he even harkened back to he twisted that look the other way, right? He took that away from Jackson last year.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
When Jackson said that, it crawled right up my ass. I wanted to jump out of because it was so frustrating to hear somebody accusing someone else of wanting to distract, and they want you to look the other way when that's what Jackson is doing, right? And Hank took that right back, snatched it right out of his mouth. And it was really incredible to watch. It's just it's a lot. And to see somebody so adept handle this. I mean, I can't imagine that she walks out of here.
Yeah.
Free.
I don't know. You never know. You never don't jinx anything. You never know what.
I don't want to jinx it. No, but I think that, we've got another hung jury situation or a conviction on our hands here. I don't think that acquittal is a high likelihood at all. I won't say impossible, nothing is, but I don't see it as very likely at all. I mean, even if you just contrast the closing arguments, right? I think Jackson made a terrible mistake, and yet again, and the judge gave him an out and said, you can't do this. I'm telling you, no third party. And they crossed the line, and, Brennan probably could have objected, and that just shows how rare objections are. There are probably times both sides honestly could have successfully objected in that, but he shouldered into it again, and that just fed Hank to be able to be like, look at how unreasonable their theory is. And we know the last jury that was definitely infected with free Karen Reed people, the majority of them did not buy into this conspiracy at all. It's a losing strategy, and that's what they ended on again.
Yeah.
I was talking to last night a friend of mine, well, one of my college roommates and one of my best friends in college, who first he's a judge in Colorado now, so he's following this case a little bit, not fully, but just a little bit since knowing that I've been on it, and so he was recently on a cruise. Man, I so wish I could take a cruise like this. Him and his wife went to Italy, where they went to Rome, and then the cruise went to Barcelona, Spain, and just what I wouldn't give. Actually, they left Rome. They left the Vatican 24 hours before the new Pope was aroused. Now, my friend is Jewish, but it's still just for the historical moment. He wished he could have been there. But on the way home on the cruise, a couple of American couples that they had befriended. One of them was a woman from New Orleans who happened to say, "Have you guys heard of the Karen Reed case?" And my friend's
Jeez.
like, "Well, yeah." And she's like, "Man, this woman got framed, And my friend is like, "Have you ever heard of Yellow Cottage Tales?" And she's like, "Yeah, we have no use for that." And he's like, "That's my college roommate." But this
my
is, like I
God.
said, there are people that just believe in this all the
Yeah.
way across. And hearing those things, and this morning listening to Alan Jackson and having my blood boil a little bit. And I just, for so many reasons, and this feeling last year after the first trial, just wanting this to be over so much. And last summer, after the first trial ended, I took about a month off and just didn't do a lot of shows, wasn't really covering this case. But I'm already feeling, if for some reason, and God forbid, there is another hung jury, I'm ready to keep fighting. I really am. I don't know what that fight involves. I think I want to do another, I had started doing this before, but do a series of videos and to just simply points out the logic of this case, that I just so frustrated at these things that Alan Jackson laid out that are built on half truths, things that have been debunked, but that the public doesn't know that they've been debunked. I get frustrated, and I'm ready to fight. And I want to make sure that truth gets out there.
I'm right there with you, Kevin. This is sort of, this stuff can't
Yeah.
stand.
No.
As a
couldn't
guy
help-
that, oh, sorry about that, buddy. Go ahead.
I was just going to say I couldn't help but it was overwhelming listening to Hank's closing there, and it's taken me a few minutes to try to focus my thoughts here, but I couldn't help but think of and you reminded me of that, Kevin, when he said you're ready to fight again. All the people who have trauma bonded over harassment, over the loss of their loved one, all the people who have made connections and helped each other. I've witnessed that in real time. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And to hear, like Kate said, Hank put forth everything he did so crystalline, it did feel vindicating. No matter what happens, to hear that was beyond powerful. So, I'd like to thank everybody that's been out there working in the trenches, nameless, some of them faceless, some of them. Appreciate all of it.
Right. Even like Laura, who's during the last trial, got us that picture of her. And I think she's from Indiana, got us that picture of her son, who's 6'2", standing in front of the same model Lexus and showing how the arm lined up and the dent where the hand would have been. And, and Hank didn't use that picture, but he used a similar picture, or Aperture did anyways. And, were they inspired by Laura? Maybe, we'll never know. But just, people have contributed in the chat here in so many ways, and they don't want their name out there because they understand the mob here. So people that send me information, they always say, please don't put my name out there.
Yeah.
Like you said, like Boomer said, there are people that are just trying to help get the truth out, and they're not trying to promote themselves. They're in fact, they don't want their name out because they're terrified, but they're doing their best to get the truth. So like Boomer said, they are appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Oh, someone asked me in the comments, somebody asked me, and I want to address it. Is it normal is Karen allowed to go up in the sidebar? We talked about this before. It's rare to see the defendants going up on sidebar with the lawyers. Usually it's just the lawyers, but she's been allowed to do it.
She has a right to do it. I think every defendant has that right. And she is.
But
she
it
just
is
rarely
not
chose to do it.
normal. Yeah.
Right,
it's just
right.
not normal.
In your opinion,
Actually-
Margaret, sorry, I was just going to.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
In your opinion, Margaret, do you believe that most lawyers would advise their client not to, if they were asking to? Would that be a reasonable response? Because we don't see it very often, but I can't imagine she's the only one that's wanted to.
Yeah. I just wonder how often it comes up. I don't know, because remember, I was a prosecutor and then I did civil defense work. Well, I know when I did civil defense work, I mean, I had clients and They didn't come up to the sidebar with me. I
She,
haven't
if you
seen
remember,
it
she
before.
motioned to try to get set up with headphones, so she could participate
Oh.
with this, or at least listen in on it, without having the appearance of going up to the sidebar. That was, I think, just in April. But now the judge ruled against that. But I guess she wanted to just hear what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, she has the right to do that. So it's just different. But whatever it is,
Right.
it is what it is. There, I don't know.
To
She
me, I think
likes
it's
to be part of it. She likes to be very involved.
To me, I think it's about the optics. Just kind of like why they don't wear orange or the jumpsuit or anything like that. That's because you don't want
Yeah.
to look at them and think that they're a criminal. The furthest away from that optic that they can get, in my opinion, is what they're aiming for. And if that means for her to go up there and speak and appear to be part of the team versus being a suspect or the accused, I think that's probably more what it is.
Yeah, I think you're right. And actually, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe it's something Ellen Jackson decided to, maybe, it's not done around here that much, but maybe it's a smart thing to do. You do look like you're part of the team. You look like you're one of the lawyers almost versus the defendant. I absolutely agree with that.
Another thing to note, we noticed that in the opening statements, Hank did paced in front of the jury. So he had building that direct communication with each juror, did his opening argument from memory. And then he did the same thing here. He's got some notes up on the podium that he can glance at, but mostly it's done from memory. And I that, which is impressive. But is it effective? I think it is, because it creates that close connection between the jurors that is so important between, for a lawyer to get that win. And he also seemed to me to build momentum. He had to kind of get through the first, 10 or 15 minutes of this. Not that those were bad, but then he really built momentum as he got more comfortable and got more on a roll up there. At least that's how I sensed it. Did you guys sense it that way?
Yeah.
I also sense that he didn't have to take the day off to write it like Alan Jackson did yesterday.
Well, I don't know if we know that, but a lot of work goes into that. He had to put in the clips too, so a lot of.
I bet he didn't sleep much last night. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, a lot of work. A lot of work goes into trying to create that. And I can just know sometimes, and you guys all know, Boomer, you will know it soon, when you're trying to get ready to do a show, and sometimes you've already scheduled a live show, and you may not have that energy when you're first trying to get going, and you try to pump yourself up as before you go on live, and but that's nothing in comparison to what these guys have to do to pump themselves up to go before a jury with so much weight, so many things dependent on the outcome of that, and knowing that it's just it's just incredible to have to what they have to go through.
I can imagine. I mean, the most pressure I've had to go in front of an audience was to not screw up my solos, and of course that happens too. But yeah, nothing like this kind of pressure.
Tell us about your solos. Tell us about your solos.
Sometimes okay, sometimes not. I just wanted to put this out. I don't usually respond directly to BS comments, but I see one here, and it's not to point out that Dan got something wrong, because I'm gonna make sure I clarify this, but. This Boston nerd says, Boomer, if you don't know that the prosecution always has the last word, you're an idiot. And really, what are you even doing here? Well, first off, you're a turd burglar. You have no idea what you're saying. That wasn't me. That was Dan. But I was wrong the other day, and I didn't know. I also learned it from Margaret. So, we don't know everything at all times.
And that's an easy thing to forget. A lot of people ask me that.
It's the attitude of the Free Karen Reed mob. It really is.
Yeah.
It's because
has to be right. It's like, sorry, but newsflash, I only know what I just learned. You know what I mean? I don't know. The list of things I don't know is longer than the list I do. So
the reason I asked though was because I have a lawyer on my team who isn't in Massachusetts, and that's not the case where they present their cases. And
there you go.
Yeah.
And I've just learned that now. So there you have it. Right.
Exactly. It depends on the jurisdiction too. But in Massachusetts, here in federal court, it's the same. But, you asked me, Kevin, if Hank did the closing argument in the Whitey Bulger case. Yes, he did.
Okay.
I just looked at my book to double check.
Yeah, that's right. That's my source on those
I
things
flipped
too.
to the back. God, how can I forget? But yeah, he had a very powerful closing argument in that Whitey Bulger trial. So he's just so good. So such an orator.
It's just to speak about getting things wrong. So somebody sent me, I think it was our moderator, Joe, sent me a clip this morning, very early. This was from a Young Jerks channel. So Mike Crawford must be last night. And he had on that weird lawyer, Nan, or whatever her name is, that was out drinking with Turtle Boy when Turtle Boy picked up his most recent charge of witness intimidation for yelling into the camera, the surveillance camera at D&E Pizza. They were with Glare. So Crawford was challenging me. He's like, they were so confident in their, he's like, Kevin, now you got 1 day left to come forward and say that Karen Reed is innocent. Then after that, no one will forgive you. And he said, we've saved everything on you. We've got all kinds of clips on you, everything that you've done and got wrong in this case. And then the one thing he mentioned, I'm sure I've got more wrong than this, but he mentioned the x-rays. But what you have to understand, Mike, is this proves I'm getting my evidence only from what is revealed in court or from documents. I don't have any inside source. I'm not getting it from the prosecution. I'm not getting it from Karen Reed. I don't have access to discovery. So yes, I got the x-rays wrong because it was never indicated at any other time until just this week or last week, when I think it was this week when that came out, that there were some simple x-rays, body length x-rays taken during the autopsy. That just never came out before. So yes, I was wrong on that, but nobody else has known about it. Kate didn't know about it either. So
I was just going to say same.
It's
Yeah,
brand
same.
new.
And again, we just worked off the assumption that anything would come out in court. But yeah, the only people that have access to discovery in this are people like Mike Crawford and Turtle Boy, who Karen Reed selectively chose to give discovery to.
Right.
That's it.
Right. Just
Sure.
like they were giving it to Peter Murphy and Sean 2 years ago, when the only thing I ever got from discovery ever was Sallyport photos from Sean, who got them from wherever he got them. But those were from discovery. Those are from someone from Karen's side. Nothing is ever leaked out from the prosecution side. Nothing, either in when Hank had control or when Lally had control. Nothing. It's always so. What we get is what we get from the trial, and that's it. So if you want to say I was wrong on that, if that's the only thing you got on me when I've been talking live on this for multiple shows a week for 2 years, I'll live with that.
Right? Yeah. Hubris is no substitute for intelligence. There's nothing.
I
wrong
just
with being
text
wrong. Tell you
Hank
what.
answered my text. He's so I said, congratulations, that was the best closing argument I've ever heard. And he's so funny. You know what he wrote? He goes, no, we literally watched you last night on court TV and we're amazed. Then and he changed it. Yeah, of course he didn't. He's great. He's great.
I hope Dr. Rentschler is enjoying a ham sandwich right now.
I know, me too.
God. Yeah, right.
That's so funny.
Don't do a mama cats, bro. Ham. No threats. No threats.
That's so funny. He's honestly, I will tell you, he's a genuine person who would never, ever do anything purposeful. Showing that t-shirt was an honest mistake. I would swear in my children's lives that's how it's right. And not just because I know him. He's not that type of person at all.
So I guess this question would be for Kate and Margaret.
Yeah.
If there is a mistrial, which there's always a good chance for a mistrial.
Oh God.
It's just one holdout juror or one juror that came on with their mind made up. If there is a mistrial, assuming the state is willing to pursue this a third trial, would Hank Brennan be willing to pursue it?
I don't know. I'll have to ask him. I'm not asking him right now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, ask him all our questions now.
I am not asking him right now. I don't know if he'd do it. I don't know how tired he was, but I would love to have some sort of live with him on at some point.
And I think
That'd
would be
fun.
about
we
the
could all ask
commitment.
questions.
I guess you would get the indication from the commitment to winning. And if it's somebody like me, or I think maybe like Kate too, I'm a competitive person, and my commitment to winning, if I was in that position, I'm like, fuck yeah, I want to do it. I'm taking this on again. I don't want to lose.
I don't know that they can afford him. I think would be the bigger issue there. Honestly, I don't know if the Norfolk County DA's office can continue to keep
Their
paying.
taxes will go up.
Yeah, right. Nobody wants that.
Well, for the same reason, they want the win too.
Fire Hank Brennan. Nobody wants their taxes going up.
I mean, they want the win too. So there's a lot at stake for a lot of people here. After all the damage they've done, the Fed should pay for this. But
right. Yeah, that's fair. They should negotiate. Yeah, the feds will pay for Hank Brennan to clean up this mess. But
I got a question in my chat, and it says, well, I want to add to it. Given how Jackson attacked the fact that they didn't bring up the rebuttal witnesses, like for instance the dog DNA and the dog bite stuff, do you think that was a mistake by Hank not to bring up the rebuttal witness, especially for the dog attack thing, and to add that there was no dog DNA there? Now, that was part of the question. I want to answer a little bit of it. I thought I remember the judge mentioning, since they weren't allowing the defense's witness to say that they were dog bites, that they were animal bites, that they weren't going to allow the rebuttal witness to say that there was no dog DNA. But I could be wrong on that. I wanted to get y'all's take on it.
no, that's not. He made the tactical decision not to call any rebuttal witnesses. He was never restricted. He was allowed to call both. He could have called Crosby. He could have called Terry Dunn, Maureen Hartnett, because she did the swabs, and Welcher. That was the plan, and he just declined to do a rebuttal case at all.
Given Jackson's tactic during closing, saying that they brought nobody up to rebut the fact that this was a dog attack, do you think that was a mistake?
Well, the whole DNA thing, when we were watching the closing arguments just now, that crossed my mind because Jackson brought it up. And I thought, if only we had some, there was something on the DNA. There's no dog DNA evidence, which we have, but that didn't come in because that would have come in through rebuttal. So that's the only area where I was like,
How plausible, when you look at the state's whole case, though, how plausible is the dog bite, really? I think we're assuming
as your dog barks.
Yeah.
That was my dog, actually.
Oh, I was like,
Yeah.
Perfect. Go ahead.
But I don't think it's that. I mean, you listen to Hank's closing, which was a very good summation of their case, right? Very good summation of the case. And where does the dog bite even fit in? I'm with him on that. I think giving it too much oxygen, it's just another trap to fall into. It's just another distraction. It doesn't line up with everything else. It doesn't make any sense. And honestly, their witness's credibility was pretty shaky throughout the whole thing, and he did a really good job of highlighting it, saying that quiet part out loud. Look at these guys over here. They're impartial. They're breaking sequestration orders. They can't give straight answers, right? I think that it was the right call. I think he would have lost the jury if he did a rebuttal. I really do.
Yeah, you might be very right on that. I just
keep in mind the
DNA
judge.
evidence.
The judge did say that the jury is fed up. So
I think,
we aren't able to see the jury, but the judge can see him. Hank Brennan can see them. So
I think Hank weighed that. I think I agree it was a tactical decision. And given what I just heard in his closing there, he knew what he was going to say in his closing. I think sort of balancing the jury being burned out and knowing what he was going to say in that closing, I think it was more than enough. It was probably it was the right move in my opinion, but I mean, he is the expert.
So we've got, just in YouTube alone, on this channel's YouTube, there's 1,543 people listening right now. And when you add all the channels together, there's much more than that listening live. And so if among those people listening are any employees of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston, I want you to know that we have a group that has been put together, and I was just speaking to him at length this morning, very early. We're coming, okay? So you can't hide the bullshit that you've been doing there forever. People are coming for you. The truth is going to come out. So like anything is all going back to Watergate, the cover-up is always worse than the crime. And that's certainly going to be the case here. So stop the cover-up. We're coming. The truth is going to come out. Trust me.
I wanted to comment on that one comment you had up there about couldn't he have tripped over the curb and hit his head, and that be what happened and not her backing up. I think you have to look at the totality of the evidence, and you got to look at the tail light, and you got to look at the micro pieces of tail light, and you got to also ask yourself, what did Karen hit that would have caused damage to that specific area of the tail light and nothing else? I think I've heard some people theorize that she may have hit somebody else's vehicle or something else that was there. But the difference is those things are stationary. Those things aren't flying away once you get hit like like hitting a pool ball off center, off to the side. You know, if they would have hit another car, there'd be more damage to the vehicle as well. Probably much more similar to what they did on that the ARCA guys did with the center impact. And so, yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. It's not just the fact that, you know, he had the damage to his head and it could have happened a number of ways. You have to look at the totality of the evidence.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
It says, you guys have doubts. Well, I will speak for myself only. I do not. Anyone here have doubts
No.
with this
No.
case? No.
No.
None
And again,
whatsoever.
let's go back to reasonable doubt. So it's not beyond all possible doubt. For example, say there's a little piece of evidence somewhere that, like the shirt, for example, how come the shirt doesn't have more holes in it? I agree that's kind of weird. You'd think it would be more scraped up, but with the totality of all the other evidence, like the text stream data and the health data, and you know that perfect timeline, the debris field, Karen's statements, there's enough evidence for me to find her guilty on all 3 counts beyond reasonable doubt. Legally,
Well, nobody's
like
investigated the wild pig theory.
I know,
Right?
The
Man,
pig.
bear,
Because
pig.
it was pig DNA, so there's got to be
I
a wild
know.
pig running loose somewhere in Canton. That's possible.
Yeah, exactly. A boar, a wild
Yeah.
boar.
There's cryptids out there doing dangerous things.
Oh yeah. Nobody has any DNA on file at the lab that did this testing for the
Right.
chupacabra, so they have not tested against
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, no, it'll be really wonder what that jury's going to do though. And Hank ended as strongly as he possibly could. So if the jury, you know, who knows if it goes the other way, it goes, nothing you can do
Oh
about
God.
it.
Dogs chew
know.
pig ears. Yes. And then if they bite something, their DNA is also there. It doesn't dissipate
I know,
and
it's
leave
amazing.
only the dog chew toy.
I
Oh my
don't
God.
get these
I know.
people that go on and on about the pig snacks for dogs. We all are aware that there's a lot of
Yeah.
dog treats that are made of pig part components. But
It
how
would
you
be
would get
both.
that? A dog is chewing on a pig snack, but it won't leave any
Right.
dog saliva or skin, or
Right.
dog skin or anything. It's just
Yeah.
I don't even understand how the mind that works that way. I don't get it. There's
Someone
something
said-
missing from those.
He was
something missing from
Rentschler
those
after
minds.
eating his ham sandwich.
Oh
no,
no,
That's right.
Rentschler. Oh my God. This whole
I,
time
That's
it was right
funny.
in front of us. And we didn't
I
notice.
think that's probably why the nixing, one of the reasons why nixing the rebuttal case was probably just the right move, right? Like the jury's fed up. They're
Yeah.
done. Once you bring the DNA in, then you're opening up that whole new stupid conversation about like, what about the pig DNA? Like, could it have been a pig?
God.
Cops are pigs. Wait a minute.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. I heard that one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
So
my God.
I think that it's just like what's the reward there? And at the end of the day, you're like again, like you're only getting so much off the Commonwealth witnesses because they're not trying to stack the deck, they're just presenting the evidence. And I say that with 100% certainty. I mean, Hank Brennan just oozes integrity. He really, really does. Okay, that is not a guy that you can see like, oh yeah, no, he's trying to get one over. So their experts are never going to speak in absolute certainties. They're never going to try to zoom in on one thing to try to mislead the jury. They're there for the purpose that he stated, just to assist, right? Not to tell you. And I like that about his closing too. He didn't tell the jury what to think. He didn't tell the jury who to trust. He said, nobody can do this but you. These are tools to help you, but it's your common sense. It's your minds that are going to resolve this case. And I really appreciated that about him. So I just think that like how that rebuttal, I don't think would have moved the needle very much and probably would have just lost the jury. I really do.
Yeah, right. I agree at this point. They're tired. They're ready to make a decision. Now the issue is, how long is the jury going to be out? Will they have any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I can't imagine this is going to be a slow deliberation. We know there's several jurors that have all these notebooks and have been taking a lot of notes and paying close attention. It's a lot of evidence to go over. You know, it's a 9-week
lot.
trial.
Yeah.
So I think they're going to take it
Absolutely.
seriously and probably take some time. You know, I could vote guilty in 15 minutes at this point, but look at how much time I've put into this, right? So
Yeah.
How long do you think it'll take?
I'm going to guess 4 days,
4 days.
but it's a guess. There's no science to this at all.
Yeah, I'd say 4 to 5.
How long is it before they decide that it's a hung jury? How long does the judge give them?
Can give them as long as it.
Yeah.
They could give them 2 weeks, but but it's as soon as the jurors pass a note to the judge saying we've reached an impasse and we don't think we can get through it anymore, then the judge will give a special instruction saying, well, you're the 12 best people to be doing this, and you've listened to all the evidence for 9 weeks, give it another try. So basically, that's what they tell them. And then, maybe 2 times. And then finally, if they're just at such an impasse like they were last time, then they'll call it a mistrial. But the judge is really going to try to avoid that and try to push them into making a decision. What I say must be so profound because everybody's silent after.
Oh, man.
Do I blow your minds?
I think today's just a particularly loaded day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know my brain's boggling all over the place. I'm sorry for sure.
No,
It's
just
such a
funny.
weird. It's just
I
like
thought
a
I
weird
lost everybody.
experience.
Yeah, no, I
Also,
know.
Oh yeah.
I thought but when you also, if you're a lawyer and you've made your closing argument, you've worked so hard, it is just drained. You're done. There's nothing you can do. You are done. And it's you just want to go to sleep for 2 weeks. It's just such a relief to be done. I remember feeling that way. Oh,
I bet.
oh, it's such a relief. Hank must be just so happy to go spend time with his family and just, So.
Right. Take a nap.
So does the jury get an instruction on deliberations? Is that what we're waiting? I know we're on lunch, right? Are they going to come back? I know the judge mentioned something to the effect like you still can't talk about it amongst each other or anything like that. So what's the next step? I'm assuming it's deliberations, but is there like a formal announcement of that stuff?
Well, no, the next step, don't forget, is the charge. She's got to charge the jury on the law, and that takes a good 2 hours. She goes through reasonable doubt. She goes through all 3 charges and their elements and, witnesses. There's quite a long list of things she talks about. And, so that the jury understands what their task is. But yeah, that can take an hour. Like usually lawyers pretend. So what I used to do is I would pretend at that point you're done. So you pretend you're listening, but you might be doodling in your book. It's just exhausting by then. But you have to pretend that you're listening to the judge if you're a lawyer.
So then do you think there will be any deliberations done today?
Yeah. What time is it? Oh, absolutely. I think they'll start deliberating. Maybe she'll try to rush the charge a little, but it still takes a good hour or so. The charge is important.
I got a question for my brother Mandan here. So you're former law enforcement, so you've had hand-to-hand training at the very least. I'm going to assume you've sparred before. You've got some experience.
Yes.
Did it hit you on like a submolecular level of cringe when that dork Alan Jackson said that the footage of them at the bar was fight practice? Did that give you douche chills like it did me? That hurt.
That was hilarious. I was laughing. I literally laughed out loud. I was like, are you serious?
Yeah.
And then I was watching it. And I was like, man, this is a stretch. And I hope that the jury feels the same way, that there's looking at this play fight or this, what I call horseplay.
Right.
They're looking at this horseplay and trying to stretch that this is some sort of getting ready or stretching to begin a fight. Some sort of training.
Man.
That was such a stretch. I don't think that Jackson should have brought that up.
Oh, it was
I thought
to the extent that he did, because I think it hurts his credibility. I didn't see any it was fun. Horseplay.
Right.
Exactly. That hurts him, I think.
Exactly. Because when I saw that and I saw what he was trying to allude to, I was like, man, I hope that everybody looks at everything else he's about to say with the same sort of skepticism into what he was saying. But, one of the things that I felt like, and again, I didn't watch the first trial, and I'm hoping that the jury didn't either. But Alan Jackson brought up Proctor, he brought up Higgins, and he mentioned that the state didn't bring up Proctor, but the defense had an opportunity to do so. And I felt that if the defense felt so strongly about these two individuals, why didn't they bring them up themselves? And I couldn't help but think maybe that's also what the jury is wondering as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was just too much of a risk, and they can sort of say what they want.
That Higgins text, I forgot about the illusion that Jackson made with the Higgins test. Standing right near them, he texted that. He didn't say ominous. What did he say? Oh, it wasn't aggressive. It was an overly dramatic word for what it was. It was like well was the text. And he tried to portray that as super dramatic and like, oh, that
aggressive text, right?
Thank you. Aggressive. That was it. Yeah, an aggressive text. Have any one of you ever walked up even and said it in person to something and went well and felt aggression? Can you feel aggressive saying well or texting it? No.
I agree.
That's not emotionally charged. Well. That's not. What?
That reminds me
of this guy from. I don't.
That reminds me of this one clip that I saw of these French gangsters. They looked real thug and scary until they started to speak. And then,
oh man,
you know what I'm saying? It was like because they spoke French and it just didn't sound scary or whatever the case may be, whatever they were saying. Well, anyways, that kind of came off that way. It's like like it's supposed to be scary. It's supposed to be like some sort of like a sign of confrontation of some sort. It's probably like, well, I figured now I know why you were. Were dodging me or whatever the case may be, but he was skeptical about her intentions throughout the entire time. I mean, that's what I gathered from the text messages, that, that he was on to her and, like, what are you trying to do here? Type of thing. And
like
so
get him jealous,
Right. Exactly. Like he's just some sort of pawn to get somebody else jealous. That's exactly the tone that I took from him and what he was saying in his text messages and stuff like that was that, right. Hey, some skepticism, because to me, I think that Karen Reed was throwing herself at him. And if she wasn't in a relationship, I think that the tone of those conversations probably go different too.
The next time somebody says, I'm well to me, I'm going to say, whoa. Calm down. And I'm going to see. And
you got to brace.
Yeah. I'm going to be, calm down. Whoa. I'm going to see how they react to that. Right. That'll be my litmus test right there. Oh my God. It's too cartoonish. The suspension of disbelief is just too much.
Does anyone know when we're back from lunch?
I think someone just posted in there. Said 30 minutes, I think. Let me find it. I believe I saw a comment fly by. It said 30 minutes. Yeah. 30 minutes ago. Okay.
When Kevin gets back, then I should ask him if he can do a poll. I'll tell him how to do it.
Sure. Beverly said Hoff.
I wonder how the jury reacted to the posings. There's nobody unbiased to ask.
Right. That's true.
I really like those clips that Hank played. I thought they were timely. I thought they were important. I thought they fit well with what he was saying and in the manner that he was saying it. And I think it fit well with what he was trying to explain. I've said it from the beginning. I think that Karen Reed's own words are going to really bite her in the rear. And I think that was in full display today.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a brutal indictment. Oh my God. Hold on. I got to find this here. Ken the plumber says, Boomer, can you mix in some more Ricky-isms and Trailer Park Boys one-liners? You said mix in some more. Man, I'm not trying to. I'm just Ricky now. Oh man.
You are.
I don't think I've dropped one, but okay.
You probably have. You probably have.
Oh my God, it's genetic. Then I'm sorry, that's Canadian.
It's pretty much autobiographical to you.
Right?
to-
Yeah, I know. It
yeah.
doesn't take rocket appliances to figure that out. Now that one I know, but I didn't. Oh wow. I actually did meet that dude once, so he's a
Freaking
pretty chill dude.
Canadians.
Yeah, I did. It was on a set. We were all having lunch there.
Someone says, I hope the jury was not influenced by any of the social media stuff and that their decision is based on what they've seen at trial. Coincidentally, Karen Reed is currently hoping for the inverse. So
Yeah. Yeah, I know it. I hope not.
Did anyone
You know,
notice her dabbing her eyes? What do you think that was about?
I did.
I didn't. When was that? Okay.
During Hank Brennan's closing, she started intermittently grabbing a tissue. They had the tissue box on the table already. It was there. I don't know if that's coincidental or not. And she would occasionally dab her eyes with the tissue. I don't know.
At what point, I wonder, though, when John O'Keefe, what she should have done was throughout the whole trial, this one and last, she should have been dabbing her eyes whenever they mentioned John O'Keefe. I swear to God, that would have made a difference.
If she was more
her.
Machiavellian, yeah, I get that. I get that for manipulation of optics and everything. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that and I believe her to be Machiavellian, but I think you have to have sort of that emotional component where you could assume that would cause that effect. And I think if you have a disconnect, you probably can't see that. So I think that's more evidence that maybe there's a few wires that don't fully connect.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you that could be, but still, if I were the lawyer, I would say, hey, why don't you show a little sympathy here and there?
Yeah, right. Nudge, nudge.
I would have advised her to do that.
Laura says I felt she was crying for herself. Yeah, I could see that.
Probably. Oh, I'm going to jail.
Grinch lips. Oh man, yeah.
I know. Oh my God.
She's full Grinchin'. She's got the Grinch lip.
She's Grinchin'.
Got a bad case of Grinch lip. But yeah, she was definitely just She was just dabbing in the each corner ever so gently, like I don't even know if that was tears. That like someone mentioned allergies. I got a bit of nerd DNA, so everything makes me like sneeze. So maybe she's got allergies too.
Could be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pollen's bad around here in Massachusetts.
It's awful. Yeah, it's bad. Yeah, I don't think she was crying. I didn't think she was crying, but she was dabbing her corners of her right eye. So unless you only cry a little bit out of the corners of your one eye, maybe I don't know.
Yeah, I thought it was odd. I thought at first maybe it was guilt, but
yeah. But the one eye, I didn't see her do it to the left, so just saying, I think it's probably
She's convinced herself that she's not guilty.
Mm-hmm.
So can't be that.
You are unmuted.
Now this is going to be the long charge.
What is not letting me see?
So who wanted to see me? I'll see you at sidebar for just a minute.
Oh, I was getting too optimistic. Definitely.
Oh, I almost called my son. Then I realized I was back on stage.
Is the jury? The jury is going to be there for this, right? Exactly. They're the ones that are getting all these instructions, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And so the jury's already in the building, correct?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Oh.
They're just Yeah,
I've never watched a full trial before. This is the first one I've ever seen.
Yeah.
When I was
exciting.
when I was in law enforcement, I never had to testify.
Surprisingly. Jeez, what did you do in law enforcement?
I was a police officer. I had a 100% arrest to conviction. Everybody pled out. I only had to go to trial one time, and when I arrived, the guy pled guilty. So,
oh wow,
my district attorney and county attorney said my report writing was superb.
It was good. I'm not surprised there.
One second.
What kind of question is that, Fox? That big question. Can you fix her? Are you asking me or the Lord above? I don't know. I don't think anybody can fix her, man. She's way damaged.
Okay, Paul.
All right, now we can.
You okay? Okay.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right, jurors, going to give you the instructions now in the law. But first, I want to thank you for serving on this jury and for being so attentive. You'll soon deliberate for the purpose of reaching a verdict. But before you do that, it's my responsibility to give you the instructions concerning the law. These instructions are divided into 3 parts. The first part, general instructions that are provided in every criminal case. The second part, specific instructions concerning the crimes alleged in this case. And third, guidelines for your deliberations. Please listen carefully to all of the instructions. Do not ignore any instruction or give any special attention to any other instruction. To make sure that I give you the instructions accurately, I will read them to you. You'll also get a written copy so that you may refer to it in the jury room during deliberations. I will try to make sure that my oral instructions match the written instructions. If there is any difference between what I say aloud and what the written instructions say, please follow what I say aloud. You must take the law as I give it to you. You may not quarrel with it. You can't do that regardless of any opinion you may have as to what you think the law ought to be. Lawyers or witnesses may suggest something about the law. That's not necessarily the law. That's because it's my responsibility as the judge and mine alone to instruct you what the law is. I'll now turn to part 1 of these instructions, which are general instructions that apply to all criminal cases. As I've explained to you at the beginning of the trial, there is a fundamental rule that applies to all criminal cases, including this case. Every person who is accused of a crime is presumed to be innocent of that crime. Ms. Reed is presumed innocent of the charges in this case. That means you must consider Ms. Reed to be innocent unless the prosecution has proved beyond a reasonable doubt through evidence presented at this trial that Ms. Reed committed the crimes charged. I'll explain what I mean by reasonable doubt in a moment. Ms. Reed does not have to do anything to convince you that she is innocent. She does not have to explain anything. She does not have to testify, call, or question witnesses, or provide any evidence at all, because you must presume she is innocent. Instead, it is up to the Commonwealth to prove the charges against Ms. Reed beyond a reasonable doubt. This burden of proof never shifts to the defendant. After you have considered all the evidence carefully and fairly, if you have a reasonable doubt about Ms. Reed's guilt in a particular charge, then your verdict must be not guilty on that charge. You may find Ms. Reed guilty of a charge only if all 12 deliberating jurors agree that the Commonwealth has proved the charge beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, what is proof beyond a reasonable doubt? The term is often used and probably pretty well understood, though it is not easily defined. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt does not mean proof beyond all possible doubt. For everything in the lives of human beings is open to some possible or imaginary doubt.
A charge is proved beyond a reasonable doubt if, after you have compared and considered all of the evidence, you have in your minds an abiding conviction to a moral certainty that the charge is true. When we refer to moral certainty, we mean the highest degree of certainty possible in matters relating to human affairs, based solely on the evidence that has been put before you in this case. I have told you that every person is presumed to be innocent unless and until he or she is proved guilty, and that the burden of proof is on the Commonwealth. If you evaluate all the evidence and you still have a reasonable doubt remaining, the defendant is entitled to the benefit of that doubt and must be acquitted. It is not enough for the Commonwealth to establish a probability, even a strong probability, that the defendant is more likely to be guilty than not guilty. That is not enough. Instead, the evidence must convince you of the defendant's guilt to a reasonable and moral certainty, a certainty that convinces your understanding and satisfies your reason and judgment as jurors who are sworn to act conscientiously on the evidence. This is what we mean by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. How do you decide whether the Commonwealth has proven that each element of an indictment is true beyond a reasonable doubt? Let's talk about the roles we all have. First, the function of the jury. You are the most important people in this room. It all begins and ends with your function. You will determine the facts in this case, and that is your job and yours alone. You are the sole and exclusive judges of the facts. If there are any conflicts in the testimony, it is your job to resolve those conflicts if you can do so. Once you determine the facts, it is your duty to apply those facts to the law as I explain it to you, and to determine whether the Commonwealth has proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. You must decide the facts solely and entirely on the evidence as you have seen, heard in this courtroom, and on nothing else. No prejudice, no bias, no fear, no favor. You must not be swayed by personal likes or dislikes. Your deliberations are no place for emotion, sympathy, passion, or prejudice. The Commonwealth and Karen Reed have a right to have the case judged by fair and impartial jurors. All parties who come before the court stand as equals before you. Therefore, your verdicts must be based on the law as I'm giving it to you, and on the evidence and the facts that you find, and nothing else. You cannot allow yourselves to be influenced by any personal feelings you may have about the nature of the crimes with which Ms. Reed has been charged or the consequences of your verdict. Just the cool, reflective, and impartial sifting of the evidence so that here in this courtroom, justice may be done. Your focus is on the evidence. I am the judge of the law. My job is to teach you the law that you must follow in the case. However, I have no opinion about how you should decide this case. You should not consider anything I have said or done during this trial as reflecting any opinion by me about how you should decide this case. If you believe I have an opinion about the facts of this case, you must disregard it. You must decide this case based solely on your evaluation of the evidence. The arguments of the lawyers are not evidence. They are not witnesses. If a lawyer during argument made a mistake in summarizing the evidence or argued something not supported by the evidence, you must disregard it. It is the jury's collective memory of the evidence that controls the matter. Lawyers' objections are a proper part of the court procedure and are not part of the evidence. So don't hold it against the lawyers or their client if they made objections, motions, or other requests. They're simply doing their job during the trial. There was testimony at trial that the lawyers interviewed witnesses when preparing for the trial. You may not draw any unfavorable inferences solely from that fact. There is nothing improper about conducting such interviews. On the contrary, the lawyers are obliged to prepare their case as thoroughly as possible and may interview witnesses. The verdict must be based only on the evidence and the jury's collective reasoning applied to the evidence in a fair and impartial manner. The extent to which you believe or disbelieve a witness or what an exhibit purports to show, and the importance to give any testimony or other evidence is entirely up to your own good judgment. The evidence consists of the testimony of the witnesses and the exhibits that were introduced in this trial. You will have those exhibits with you in the deliberation room. In addition, as you heard during the trial, the prosecution and defendant agreed that certain things are true. Therefore, you must accept those things as true. There are some things you have heard about that have not been introduced into evidence, such as previous testimony of witnesses, police reports, autopsy and accident reconstruction reports, and perhaps other reports. You may naturally wonder why neither side has introduced any of them into evidence. The answer is that under our rules of evidence, such reports usually may not be admitted, although the parties may refer to them for certain limited purposes while questioning witnesses. So you should not hold it against any party that you do not have them, and neither should you speculate on what they may or may not contain. Similarly, as you review the exhibits, you may find that some information has been removed because it is not relevant. Please ignore that and don't try to guess what may have been removed from there. Any information that you may have read, heard, or seen about the case outside of the courtroom is not evidence. My instructions to you and any other comments I made, the lawyer's opening and closing statements and any comments they made are not evidence. If the lawyers or I made any comments during the trial, those comments are not evidence and you must base your verdict only upon the evidence. In an interaction between a lawyer and a witness, you may consider only the witness's testimony as evidence. Answers that I struck from the record and told you to disregard are not evidence. Only the testimony of the witness, that is, their answers to the questions and the exhibits are evidence. Finally, on this topic, if one of the lawyers or I refer to some part of the evidence and that does not coincide with your own recollection, it is your collective recollection which you are to follow in your deliberations. It is important to remind you folks that the verdict cannot be based on emotional reaction or sympathy for any person or side of this case. Certain of the testimony and exhibits may have provoked an emotional reaction in all of us. You may feel sympathy for the family of Mr. O'Keefe, and you may feel sympathy for the defendant as she sits here in the courtroom. But your job is to decide the case without bias, fear, sympathy, or favor, to view the evidence with a certain clinical detachment, and to decide the case based solely on the evidence and the application of the law. I have allowed you folks to take notes during the trial if you chose, and you may refer to those notes during your deliberations. But remember, they are not evidence or a substitute for the evidence and your recollection. They are for your personal use. Please do not share them with the other jurors. Please consider the evidence as a whole. Do not make up your mind about what the verdict should be until after you've gone to the jury room to decide the case and you and your fellow jurors have discussed the evidence. Keep an open mind until then. For each indictment, you must decide whether the Commonwealth has proved beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty of that specific charge. Your decision as to each charge must be unanimous, meaning that all 12 deliberating jurors must agree. You will receive one verdict slip for each indictment. When all 12 jurors agree on the verdict for a particular indictment, the foreperson should check off that verdict and then sign and date the slip in ink. For each charge, if you all agree that the Commonwealth has proved every element of the charge beyond a reasonable doubt, then you should find Ms. Reed guilty of that charge. On the other hand, if you all agree that the Commonwealth did not prove one or more elements of a particular charge beyond a reasonable doubt, then your verdict must be not guilty on that charge. You'll remember that we took a view in this case. It seems like a very long time ago, but we took a view in this case. The purpose of the view was to help you better understand the evidence that you heard during the trial and to help you appreciate the locations and their surroundings. Your responsibility in the view was to see the places, observe them carefully, and remember what you saw. The view is part of this case. You may use and consider the observations that you made while on the view in your deliberations in reaching a verdict. The same is true about the demonstration we saw from the witness stand. The demonstration was done simply to help you understand the evidence, and you may consider it in your deliberations. It is the jury's job to earnestly seek the truth of the matter. In doing that, the jury must decide questions of credibility and reliability. The jury must decide how truthful or reliable or convincing any part of the evidence is. You should evaluate the testimony of a police officer in the same way you would evaluate anyone else's testimony. You must not automatically believe or disbelieve a witness just because the person is a police officer. In deciding questions of credibility and reliability, you may rely on your common sense and reasoning powers and your life experiences. Consider a witness's testimony in the context of all the other evidence, not in isolation. You may consider the demeanor, candor, and appearance of the witness in testifying. Who was the witness? What relationship did they have to the case, to the other witnesses or parties? Did the witness have any bias, reason, or motive to give false or shaded testimony? If so, you may consider that bias or motive in your deliberations and ultimately as to whether or not it impacts the credibility of the witnesses and the assessment of the evidence presented. Is the witness someone likely to give an honest and impartial account? Consider not just whether the witness was honest, but also whether the witness's testimony was accurate and reliable or honestly mistaken. A prior statement by a witness, if inconsistent with his or her trial testimony in any way, may be considered on the witness's credibility and reliability, and only for this purpose. Also, if there has been a suggestion that a witness recently contrived their testimony, you may take into account any earlier statement the witness made which was consistent with their present testimony. The prior statement is relevant only as to the witness's credibility and reliability, and only for this purpose. You have heard some evidence suggesting that the Commonwealth did not conduct certain scientific tests or otherwise follow standard procedure during the police investigation. This is a factor you may consider in evaluating the evidence presented in this case. With respect to this factor, you should consider 3 questions. First, whether the omitted test or other actions were standard procedure or steps that would otherwise normally be taken under the circumstances. Second, whether the omitted tests or actions could reasonably have been expected to lead to significant evidence of the defendant's guilt or innocence. And third, whether the evidence provides a reasonable and adequate explanation for the omission of the test or other actions. If you find that any omissions in the investigation were significant and not adequately explained, you may consider whether the omissions tend to affect the quality, reliability, or credibility of the evidence presented by the Commonwealth. All of these considerations involve factual determinations that are entirely up to you. And you are free to give this matter whatever weight, if any, you deem appropriate based on all the circumstances. During the trial, I gave you some instructions on how you were to consider some of the evidence you heard, and importantly, how you are not to consider the evidence. I'm going to summarize those limiting instructions here. Ms. Reed is not charged with committing any crime other than the charges contained in the indictments. You've heard evidence about interactions that Ms. Reed may have had with Mr. O'Keefe in Aruba and others in Aruba. The evidence was admitted solely for your consideration as evidence of the nature of the defendant's relationship with Mr. O'Keefe and whether it goes to her knowledge or intent or motive on January 29, 2022. You may not consider the evidence as proof that she has a criminal personality or bad character. You may not take the defendant's prior acts as a substitute for proof that the defendant committed the crimes charged here, or to conclude that if she committed the acts in Aruba, she must have committed the offenses with which she is charged here. You can only use the evidence for the limited purpose of how it goes to the defendant's state of mind, motive, and the nature of her relationship with John O'Keefe. Before you consider any electronic communication in your deliberations, you must first find that it is more likely true than not that the persons who authored the electronic communications were in fact John O'Keefe, Ms. Reed, Michael Proctor, Brian Higgins, or others alleged to have authored or created them. If you do not find it is more likely true than not that the persons alleged to have authored or transmitted or created the communications were the persons alleged to have done so, then you may not consider the electronic communication in deciding the case. Photographs have been entered into evidence, and in some instances, those photographs will be inside an envelope when they go back to you to the deliberation room. The photographs may be graphic and unpleasant. As I told you when you first saw them, your verdict must not in any way be influenced by the fact that these photographs may be graphic or unpleasant. The defendant is entitled to a verdict based solely on the evidence and not one based on pity or sympathy. Consider a photograph only as it may show a medical condition, the nature of the injuries, or the details of the incident itself. You heard evidence of statements made by John O'Keefe. These statements were admitted only for a limited purpose of establishing John O'Keefe's state of mind. You are not to consider this testimony as proof that the defendant has bad character or propensity to commit crimes. The testimony of witnesses recounting conversations with Mr. O'Keefe or messages the defendant's phone received from him can only be used as they go to the defendant's motive or intent on January 29th, and only if you find that Ms. Reed was aware of Mr. O'Keefe's state of mind at the time of the crime and would be likely to respond to it. There need not be direct evidence that the defendant learned of Mr. O'Keefe's state of mind, so long as you can reasonably infer from the evidence that she did learn of it. Now, you have heard testimony about statements allegedly made by Ms. Reed. Before you may consider any such statement, you're going to have to make a preliminary determination whether it can be considered as evidence or not, and for what purpose it may be used. You may not consider any such statement in your deliberations for the truth of any such statement unless, from all of the evidence in the case, the Commonwealth has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant made the statement that she's alleged to have made and that she made it voluntarily, freely, and rationally. In determining whether or not any statement made by the defendant was voluntary, you may consider all of the surrounding circumstances. You may consider any evidence you have heard about the defendant's physical and mental condition, her intelligence, age, education, and experience. Your decision does not turn on any one factor. You must consider the totality of the circumstances. Some testimony came from witnesses who saw or heard something. Some witnesses also told you about opinions or conclusions they reached based on some special training or experience. But special training or experience does not necessarily make the witness's testimony any more believable or important than any other evidence. So you should consider the same questions about witnesses' testimony that I mentioned earlier, including any bias or motive these opinioned witnesses may have had to testify in a certain way. You may also consider the witness's level of experience and training and whether they base their opinions on the facts that you find to be true. There were hypothetical questions asked of some of the witnesses. You may give whatever weight you deem appropriate to the opinion based on the hypothetical, but only if, after careful consideration, you find that all the facts in the hypothetical were true. Remember that witnesses, even those with special training or experience, do not decide cases. Juries do. It is up to you whether to accept or reject, in whole or in part, any opinion or conclusion that a witness offered during the trial. You have the same powers with respect to the exhibits that you do with respect to the witnesses. Look them over and decide the weight, that is the value, that they deserve to receive in helping you resolve the case as you make your ultimate judgment about whether the Commonwealth has proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt. You do not have to believe something simply because it's written on a piece of paper or appears in a photograph. You are not, of course, required to disbelieve it because it appears there. You decide whether to believe what an exhibit purports to show and how much weight, if any, to give the exhibit. Certain charts and summaries not admitted into evidence have been shown to you as testimonial aids intended to summarize, clarify, simplify evidence, or to help explain the contents of records, documents, computer data, or other evidence introduced in the case. Charts and summaries are not new evidence, and you should give them only such weight as you think the underlying evidence deserves. So you've heard me talk about sources of evidence in this case. Those are the tools that you have to decide the case. Now, with that evidence in mind, what can you do with it? As jurors, you may bring to bear all your knowledge and experience. You don't check your common sense at the door to the jury room. Just the reverse. I instruct you to use your common sense. Give the evidence a reasonable and fair construction in the light of your common knowledge and experience. In determining the facts in this case, you may draw reasonable inferences from the evidence that you believe because you're entitled to rely upon both direct and indirect or circumstantial evidence. Direct evidence is evidence of what a witness claims to have seen or heard or touched or somehow perceived with their own senses. Indirect or circumstantial evidence exists where a witness does not testify directly to the fact that is sought to be proven, but you are provided with evidence of other facts and then asked to draw reasonable inferences from them about the fact that sought to be proved. Such inferences may be considered with all of the other evidence in reaching your verdict. Indirect or circumstantial evidence alone is sufficient to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, what do I mean by an inference? An inference is a logical deduction or conclusion that you may, but are not required to draw from evidence that you have accepted as believable. Inferences are little steps in reasoning, steps in which you take some known information, apply your experience in life to it, and then draw a conclusion. Sometimes you can draw more than one inference. You have to decide which inferences are reasonable and decide which seem more reasonable to you. Remember, when you're dealing with inferences, you never have to infer anything. You may, but do not have to draw inferences whatsoever. An inference drawn from indirect or circumstantial evidence need not be necessary or inescapable, but any inference which you do draw must be reasonable and possible. It must be logical. It must be a natural one, which is not too remote in the ordinary course of events. You may not guess. You may not speculate. You may not engage in surmise. You should not pile inference upon inference until the pile gets so high that it tips over logically, or that the chain gets so weak that it doesn't hold together anymore. When you run through your inferences, check the starting point and the ending point to make sure that they're still reasonable. Further, when the evidence tends to equally give rise to either of two inconsistent propositions, the Commonwealth has established neither proposition. In order to convict the defendant, you must find that all of the evidence and the reasonable inferences that you have drawn, taken together, prove that she is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Let me give you an example of an inference. Suppose that the issue you must decide is whether the U.S. Postal Service delivered the mail today. If you go home and someone in your household hands you the mail and states that they observed the letter carrier deliver the mail and retrieved it from the mailbox, this would be direct evidence that the U.S. Postal Service delivered the mail. The witness perceived the events with his or her own senses and told you what he or she observed. The issue you would have to decide is whether that witness was credible. On the other hand, if you go home from court and find mail in the mailbox, you may infer that it was delivered by the U.S. Postal Service today. You draw this reasonable inference based on the following known facts. The mailbox was emptied yesterday. You know that the mail is delivered by the U.S. Postal Service Monday through Saturday. The letters in the box are postmarked. You have exactly the same power in this case, not the power to speculate or to guess, but the power to draw reasonable inferences warranted by the evidence in the fashion I've just described. You may have noticed that Ms. Reed did not testify at this trial. Defendant has an absolute right not to testify since the entire burden of proof in this case is on the Commonwealth to prove that the defendant is guilty. It is not up to the defendant to prove that she is innocent. The fact that Ms. Reed did not testify has nothing to do with the question of whether she is guilty or not guilty. You are not to draw any adverse inference against the defendant because she did not testify. You're not to consider it in any way or even discuss it in your deliberations. You must determine whether the Commonwealth has proved its case against the defendant based solely on the testimony of the witnesses and the exhibits. Now that completes the first part of my instructions. Now I'm going to turn to the elements of the charges against Ms. Reed. The Commonwealth has alleged that on January 29, 2022, Ms. Reed did assault and beat John O'Keefe with the intent to murder him, and by such assault and battery did kill and murder John O'Keefe. So in that indictment, Ms. Reed is charged with second-degree murder. Now, I just want to tell you that our Supreme Judicial Court has promulgated jury instructions on homicide charges that I have to read verbatim. So I want to make sure to do that right. So murder in the second degree. In order to prove murder in the second degree, the Commonwealth must prove the following elements. 1, the defendant caused the death of John O'Keefe. 2, the defendant intended to kill John O'Keefe or intended to cause grievous bodily harm to John O'Keefe, or intended to do an act which, in the circumstances known to Ms. Reed, a reasonable person would have known created a plain and strong likelihood that death would result. I will now discuss each of these requirements in more detail. The first element is that the defendant caused the death of John O'Keefe. A defendant's act is the cause of death where the act, in a natural and continuous sequence, results in death, and without which death would not have occurred. The second element is that the defendant intended to kill John O'Keefe, or intended to cause grievous bodily harm to John O'Keefe, or intended to do an act which, in the circumstances known to the defendant, a reasonable person would have known created a plain and strong likelihood that death would result. As you can see, the second element has 3 sub-elements, which I shall call prongs, and the Commonwealth satisfies its burden of proof if it proves any one of these 3 prongs beyond a reasonable doubt. The first prong is that the defendant intended to kill John O'Keefe. This means that the defendant consciously and purposefully intended to cause John O'Keefe's death. The second prong is that the defendant intended to cause grievous bodily harm to John O'Keefe. Grievous bodily harm means severe injury to the body. The third prong is that the defendant intended to do an act which, in the circumstances known to the defendant, a reasonable person would have known created a plain and strong likelihood that death would result. Let me help you understand how to analyze this third prong. You must first determine whether the defendant intended to perform the act that caused the victim's death. If you find that she intended to perform the act, you must then determine what the defendant herself actually knew about the relevant circumstances at the time she acted. Then you must determine whether, under the circumstances known to the defendant, a reasonable person would have known that the act intended by the defendant created a plain and strong likelihood that death would result. If you have a reasonable doubt as to whether John O'Keefe's death was accidental because the death was caused by a negligent, careless, or mistaken act of the defendant, or resulted from a cause separate from the defendant's conduct, you may not find that the Commonwealth has proved that the defendant intended to kill, intended to cause grievous bodily harm, or intended to do an act which, in the circumstances known to the defendant, a reasonable person would have known created a plain and strong likelihood that death would result. In deciding whether the defendant intended to kill, intended to cause grievous bodily harm, or intended to do an act which, in the circumstances known to the defendant, a reasonable person would have known created a plain and strong likelihood that death would result, you may consider any credible evidence that the defendant was affected by her consumption of alcohol. If the Commonwealth has proven both elements beyond a reasonable doubt, you should return a verdict of guilty. If the Commonwealth has failed to prove one or more of these elements beyond a reasonable doubt, you must return a verdict of not guilty. Now, the second indictment is the indictment charging manslaughter while operating a motor vehicle under the influence of liquor. And there are lesser included offenses on this verdict slip as well, and I'll explain those to you as well. In order to prove manslaughter while operating a motor vehicle, the Commonwealth must prove the following 5 elements. First, that the defendant operated a motor vehicle. Second, that she operated the motor vehicle upon a public way or in a place which the public has the right of access. Third, that while the defendant was operating the motor vehicle, she was under the influence of intoxicating liquor and or the percent of alcohol in the defendant's blood was 0.08 or greater. Fourth, the defendant operated the vehicle wantonly or recklessly so as to create a high degree of likelihood that substantial harm will result to another. Fifth, that by such operation of the motor vehicle, the defendant caused the death of John O'Keefe. To prove the first element, the Commonwealth must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant was operating a motor vehicle. A person operates a motor vehicle while doing all of the things, the well-known things that drivers do as they travel on a street or highway, and also when doing any act which directly tends to set the vehicle in motion. A person is operating a motor vehicle whenever they are in the vehicle and intentionally manipulate some mechanical or electrical part of the vehicle, like the gear shift or the ignition, which alone or in sequence will set the vehicle in motion. To prove the second element, the Commonwealth must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant operated a motor vehicle in a public way. Any street or highway that is open to the public and is controlled and maintained by some level of government is a public way. This would include, for example, interstate and state highways, as well as municipal streets and roads. In determining whether any particular street or road is a public way, you may consider evidence, if any, about whether it has some of the usual indications of a public way. For example, whether it is paved, whether it has street lights, street signs, curbing, and fire hydrants, whether there are buildings along the street, whether it has any crossroads intersecting it, and whether it is publicly maintained. To prove the third element, the Commonwealth must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that while operating a motor vehicle, the defendant was under the influence of intoxicating liquor, that is alcohol, and or the percent of alcohol in the defendant's blood was 0.08 or greater. I will now instruct you on both theories. What does it mean to be under the influence of alcohol? It is not illegal to drive after consuming alcohol as long as the operator is not under the influence of alcohol. However, neither does someone have to be drunk to be under the influence of alcohol. A person is under the influence of alcohol if they have consumed enough alcohol to reduce their ability to operate a motor vehicle safely by decreasing their judgment, alertness, and ability to respond promptly and effectively to unexpected emergencies. The amount of alcohol necessary to do this may vary from person to person. The Commonwealth is not required to prove that the defendant actually drove in an unsafe or erratic manner, but it is required to prove that the defendant's ability to drive safely was diminished by alcohol. You may rely on your experience and common sense about the effects of alcohol. You should consider any believable evidence about the defendant's alleged consumption of alcohol, as well as the defendant's appearance, condition, and behavior. In deciding this theory of whether the defendant operated a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol, you may also consider whether a blood test showed that the defendant had consumed alcohol. However, no matter what the reading is, the blood test is not sufficient by itself to prove that the defendant was under the influence of alcohol. Under the second theory, the Commonwealth must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that at the time of operation, the percent of alcohol in the defendant's blood was 0.08 or greater. The Commonwealth may prove a person's blood alcohol level by a chemical test or analysis of their breath or blood. In deciding whether the Commonwealth has proved the defendant's blood alcohol level beyond a reasonable doubt, you may consider evidence, if any, about whether the test was administered within a reasonable time of operation of the motor vehicle, whether the person who administered the test was properly certified, whether and how the pre-test procedures were followed and employed, whether the testing device was working properly at the time the test was administered, and whether the test was administered properly. You may also consider any other evidence pertaining to the test or the test results. The fourth element the Commonwealth must prove beyond a reasonable doubt is that the defendant operated the vehicle wantonly or recklessly. A person drives recklessly when they ignore the fact that their manner of driving is very likely to result in death or serious injury to someone, or they are indifferent to whether someone is killed or seriously injured. It is not enough for the Commonwealth to prove that the defendant acted negligently, that is, acted in a way that a reasonably careful person would not. It must be shown that the defendant's actions went beyond mere negligence and amounted to recklessness. The defendant was reckless if she knew or should have known that such actions would pose a grave danger of death or serious injury to others, but chose, nevertheless, to run the risk and go ahead. Whenever I refer to the defendant's state of mind or her intent, you may consider any credible evidence that the defendant was affected by her consumption of alcohol. A defendant may have the requisite state of mind or intent even if she consumed alcohol, but you may consider such evidence in determining whether the Commonwealth has proved this element. Here, the defendant must have intended her acts in the sense that they were not accidental. But it is not necessary that the defendant intended or foresaw the consequences of those acts, as long as a reasonable person would know that they were so dangerous that death or serious injury would probably result. As such, the Commonwealth does not need to prove that the defendant intended to kill John O'Keefe. Rather, this is in that category of cases where public safety requires each driver, once they know what the situation is, to determine and to adhere to an objective standard of behavior. In determining whether the defendant drove recklessly, you should take into account all the facts of the situation: the defendant's rate of speed and manner of operation, the defendant's physical condition, and how well the defendant could see and control her vehicle, the condition of the defendant's vehicle, what kind of road it was and who else was on the road, what the time of day, the weather, and the condition of the road were, what any other vehicles or pedestrians were doing, and any other factors, including the defendant's consumption of alcohol, that you think are relevant. The fifth element that the Commonwealth must prove beyond a reasonable doubt is that the defendant, by her actions, caused the death of John O'Keefe. The defendant caused the death if her actions directly and substantially set in motion the entire chain of events that produced the death. A defendant's act is the cause of death where the act is a natural and continuous sequence, results in death, and without which death would not have occurred. If the Commonwealth has proven all five elements beyond a reasonable doubt, you should return a verdict of guilty. If the Commonwealth has failed to prove one or more of these elements beyond a reasonable doubt, you must return a verdict of not guilty. Now, the lesser offense of manslaughter while operating a motor vehicle under the influence of liquor includes the lesser offense of involuntary manslaughter. As a matter of law, the indictment that is before you, which charges the defendant with manslaughter while operating a motor vehicle under the influence of liquor, also charges her with that lesser included offense. The Commonwealth may prove the lesser included offense of involuntary manslaughter, even if it fails to prove the greater charge of manslaughter while operating a motor vehicle under the influence. So I'm going to define involuntary manslaughter for you. To prove that the defendant is guilty of involuntary manslaughter because of wanton or reckless conduct, the Commonwealth must prove the following elements beyond a reasonable doubt. First, that the defendant caused John O'Keefe's death. Second, that the defendant intended the conduct that caused John O'Keefe's death. And third, the defendant's conduct was wanton or reckless. I will now discuss each element in detail. The first element is that the defendant caused the death of John O'Keefe. Remember, Ms. Reed caused John O'Keefe's death if her actions directly and substantially set in motion the entire chain of events that produced the death. A defendant's act is the cause of death where the act in a natural and continuous sequence results in death, and without which death would not have occurred. The second element is that the defendant intended the conduct that caused the death. The Commonwealth is not required to prove that the defendant intended to cause the death. You may consider any credible evidence that the defendant was affected by her consumption of alcohol. The third element is that the defendant's conduct was wanton or reckless. Wanton or reckless conduct is conduct that creates a high degree of likelihood that substantial harm will result to another. It is conduct involving grave risk of harm to another that a person undertakes with indifference or disregard of the consequences of such conduct. Whether conduct is wanton or reckless depends either on what the defendant knew or how a reasonable person would have acted knowing what the defendant knew. If the defendant realized the grave risk created by her conduct, her subsequent act amounts to wanton or reckless conduct, whether or not a reasonable person would have realized the risk of great danger. Even if the defendant herself did not realize the grave risk of harm to another, the act would constitute wanton or reckless conduct if a reasonable person, knowing what the defendant knew, would have realized the act posed a risk of grave danger to another. It is not enough for the Commonwealth to prove the defendant acted negligently, that is, in a manner that a reasonably careful person would not have acted. The Commonwealth must prove that the defendant's actions went beyond negligence and amounted to wanton or reckless conduct, as I have defined that term. In deciding whether the defendant knew or should have known her conduct created a high degree of likelihood that substantial harm would result to another, you may consider any credible evidence that the defendant was affected by her consumption of alcohol. A defendant may have the requisite knowledge even if she consumed alcohol, but you may consider such evidence in determining whether the Commonwealth has proved this element. Now, the offense of manslaughter while operating a motor vehicle under the influence of liquor also includes the lesser offense of motor vehicle homicide, felony OUI, and negligence. As a matter of law, the indictment that is before you that charges the defendant with manslaughter while operating a motor vehicle under the influence of liquor also charges her with the lesser included offense. With that lesser included offense, the Commonwealth may prove the lesser included charge of motor vehicle homicide, even if it fails to prove the greater charge of manslaughter while operating a motor vehicle under the influence of liquor. You may find the defendant guilty of motor vehicle homicide only if you are not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty of manslaughter, and you are convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty of motor vehicle homicide. On the verdict slip, that just means you start from the top and you work your way down. In order to prove the defendant guilty of motor vehicle homicide, the Commonwealth must prove the following 5 elements beyond a reasonable doubt. First, that the defendant operated a motor vehicle. Second, that she operated the motor vehicle upon a public way or in a place in which the public has the right of access. Third, that while the defendant was operating the motor vehicle, she was under the influence of intoxicating liquor and or the percent of alcohol in the defendant's blood was 0.08 or greater. Fourth, that while operating a motor vehicle, the defendant did so in a negligent manner so that the lives or safety of the public might be endangered. Fifth, that by such operation of the motor vehicle, the defendant caused the death of John O'Keefe. Elements 1, 2, 3, and 5 are the same as manslaughter while under the influence of alcohol, as previously instructed a few moments ago. The difference between manslaughter while operating under the influence and motor vehicle homicide is the 4th element, so I'll focus on that. To prove the 4th element of motor vehicle homicide, the Commonwealth must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant drove negligently in a manner that might have endangered the lives or safety of other people. A person acts negligently when she fails to use due care, that is, when they act in a way that a reasonable person would not act. This can happen either by doing something that a reasonable person would not do under the circumstances, or by not doing something that a reasonable person would do. The defendant acted negligently if she drove in a way that a reasonable person would not have, and by doing so created an unnecessary danger to other people, a danger that she could have avoided by driving more carefully. The defendant's intent does not matter, so do not consider it in determining whether or not the defendant was negligent. There is no requirement that the Commonwealth show that the defendant intended to act negligently or unlawfully. Under our laws, public safety requires each driver to determine and to adhere to an objective standard of reasonable behavior. Therefore, what the defendant may or not have intended to result from her actions is irrelevant. The issue is whether or not she drove as a reasonable person would have under the circumstances. In determining whether the defendant drove negligently in a manner that might have endangered the lives or safety of other people, you should take into account evidence, if any, about the defendant's rate of speed and manner of operation, the defendant's physical condition and how well she could see and control her vehicle, the condition of the defendant's vehicle, the kind of a road it was and who else was on the road, the time of day, the weather, and the road conditions, what any other vehicles or pedestrians were doing, and any other factors, including the defendant's consumption of alcohol, that you think are relevant. The offense of manslaughter while operating under a motor vehicle under the influence of liquor also includes the lesser offense of motor vehicle homicide, felony OUI liquor, and the lesser offense, I'm sorry, hold on. And the lesser included offense of operating under the influence. As a matter of law, the indictment that is before you, which charges the defendant with manslaughter while operating a motor vehicle under the influence of liquor, also charges her with these lesser included offenses. So the Commonwealth may prove the lesser included charge of operating under the influence, even if it fails to prove the greater charges of manslaughter while operating a motor vehicle under the influence of liquor and motor vehicle homicide. You may find the defendant guilty of operating under the influence only if you are not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty of manslaughter, and you are not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty of motor vehicle homicide, but are convinced that the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of operating under the influence. To prove the defendant guilty of operating under the influence, the Commonwealth must prove elements 1, 2, and 3 that I instructed you on motor vehicle homicide while OUI. So the third indictment is leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death. In order to prove the defendant guilty of leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death, the Commonwealth must prove 6 things beyond a reasonable doubt. First, that the defendant operated a motor vehicle. Second, that she operated a motor vehicle on a public way or in a place which the public has a right of access. Third, that the defendant knowingly collided with John O'Keefe. Fourth, that the collision caused injury to John O'Keefe, resulting in his death. Fifth, that after causing such injury, the defendant failed to stop and provide name, home address, and registration number of the motor vehicle. And sixth, that the defendant failed to do so for the purpose of avoiding prosecution or apprehension. Jurors, I've already instructed on the first and second elements. The other 4 elements should be given their plain meaning, and the parties agree that I do not need to define these any further, correct? Okay, thank you. All right. As a general rule, you're permitted but not required to infer that a person who intentionally uses a dangerous weapon on another person intends to kill that person or cause him grievous bodily harm, or intends to do an act which, in the circumstances known to him or her, a reasonable person would know creates a plain and strong likelihood that death would result. An item that is normally used for innocent purposes can become a dangerous weapon if it is used in a dangerous or potentially dangerous fashion. The law considers an item, in this case a motor vehicle, to be used in a dangerous fashion if it is used in a way that it reasonably appears to be capable of causing serious injury or death to another person. In deciding whether an item was used as a dangerous weapon, you may consider the circumstances surrounding the alleged crime, the nature, size, and shape of the item, and the manner in which it was handled or controlled. That completes my second part of the instructions. I'm now going to turn to the third and final part, which is shorter. In order for a jury to return a verdict, that is, to reach a decision in a criminal case, the law provides that there may only be 12 persons on the deliberating jury, and you will note that there are 18 of you. To avoid the need for a new trial if one or more jurors becomes ill or is to be excused for some good reason, we customarily impanel extra jurors at the beginning of a trial, as we did in this case. Because of the anticipated and now actual length of this trial, we impaneled more jurors than are commonly impaneled. However, when you begin your deliberations, the law in Massachusetts is that only 12 jurors can deliberate. Therefore, at the conclusion of my instructions, Mr. McDermott will reduce your number to 12 on a random basis. The jurors not selected to serve in the jury will become the alternate jurors. If you are selected as an alternate juror, please do not feel that your efforts in this case have been wasted, because as I've indicated, it's important that we have extra jurors in case of an emergency. If we did not impanel extra jurors and a juror became ill, or for some other reason had to be excused, we would have to try the whole case all over again with the new jury. In the event that a juror has to be excused once the jury starts deliberating, then an alternate juror will be chosen to take that juror's position, and the jury will be required to start deliberations from the beginning. Therefore, it's important that the alternates not discuss the case with anyone else, including each other. For if an alternate becomes a member of the jury for deliberations, the alternate's views should be his or her own and not be influenced by anyone else. Different states and jurisdictions use different means to select a foreperson of the jury. In some jurisdictions, the jurors select their own person. In Massachusetts, the judge is responsible for selecting the foreperson. A foreperson of a jury has been described as the first among equals. He or she is responsible for organizing the deliberations, communicating with the court if necessary during deliberations, and presenting the verdict following your deliberations. The foreperson has no greater say or vote in the jury's deliberations. However, and in that sense, the juror is equal with all other jurors. I am going to ask the juror seated in seat number 1, your juror number 5, sir, would you agree to be foreperson in this case? I'm going to ask you if you would be foreperson in this case. Thank you. I always appreciate it when people say yes before I tell you what's involved, but thank you very much. All right. So the foreperson will be given the verdict slip setting forth the charges against the defendant. 12 jurors must agree. So, all right. So I skipped the line. When you return to the jury room to deliberate, the court officers will deliver to you all the exhibits in this case, as well as the verdict slips that you'll be using in returning your verdict. So the foreperson will be given the verdict slip setting forth the charges against the defendant. 12 jurors must agree before you have a decision to any specific charge. That means that to find the defendant guilty, all 12 must agree. To find the defendant not guilty, all 12 must agree. You should consider each indictment individually and continue deliberating until you've reached a final verdict. You should not begin deliberating until all 12 jurors are together in the jury room, and should cease deliberating if any one juror is not present in the jury room. It is important that you not communicate with anyone outside the jury room about the deliberations or about anything concerning this case. Further, I remind you that no juror is better qualified to determine the truth of the facts in this case, to dispute or to deliberate on a verdict solely because of education, background, or experience. The parties and I have chosen each of you as fair and impartial jurors, and your voices have equal weight. To reach a unanimous to reach an unanimous verdict, each juror must agree. Jurors have a duty to consult with one another and to deliberate with a view to reaching an agreement, if it can be done without violence to individual judgment. At the same time, each juror must decide the case for himself or herself, but only after impartially considering the evidence with his or her fellow jurors. Don't hesitate to re-examine your views and change your opinion if convinced it is wrong. But no juror should surrender an honest conviction to the opinion of fellow jurors simply for the purpose of reaching a verdict. Although how you conduct your deliberations is up to you, I urge you not to begin by conducting an immediate straw vote. Rather, I encourage you not to take any votes before you've had completed a careful and thorough collective view of all the evidence. At this point, I want to remind you of an important issue that I raised with you at the beginning of this trial. I told you that our system of justice depends on judges like me and jurors like you being able and willing to make careful and fair decisions. All people deserve fair and equal treatment in our system of justice, regardless of their race, national origin, religion, age, ability, gender, sexual orientation, education, income level, or any other personal characteristic. I also pointed out that we all have our own built-in expectations and assumptions, even if we are not conscientiously aware of them. And I talked about some of the ways we can try to deal with them. First, slow down. Do not rush to a decision. Hasty decisions are the most likely to reflect stereotypes or hidden biases. Take time to consider all the evidence. Second, as you start to draw conclusions, consider what evidence, if any, supports the conclusions you are drawing and whether any evidence casts doubt on those conclusions. Double check whether you are actually using unsupported assumptions instead of the evidence. Third, as you think about the people involved in this case, consider them as individuals rather than as members of a particular group. Fourth, I might ask myself, would I view the evidence differently if the people were from different groups, such as different racial, ethnic, or gender identity groups? Fifth, listen to your fellow jurors. They may have different points of view. If so, they may help you determine whether you are focusing on the facts or making assumptions, perhaps based on stereotypes. Of course, your fellow jurors could be influenced by their own unstated assumptions, so don't be shy or hesitant to speak up. You should participate actively, particularly if you think the other jurors are overlooking or undervaluing evidence you find important. In fact, when you explain your thoughts out loud to other jurors, you are also helping yourself to focus on the evidence instead of assumptions. If you use these strategies, then you will do your part to reach a decision that is as fair as humanly possible, and that is your responsibility as jurors. Now, during the course of your deliberations, you might have a question concerning the law in this case. Perhaps I said something you did not understand. If you have any questions, please feel free to bring them to my attention by writing a note dated and signed by the foreperson and sending it to me by way of the court officers. I'm not suggesting for a minute that you have to have questions, but if you do, that's the process. Because your role as the jury is to determine the facts in this case, I cannot answer any questions you have concerning the facts of the case. I have no role in this case when it comes to deciding what the facts are. Neither is it possible for me to provide you with a transcript of the testimony. If you send a question to me, I'll respond after consulting with the lawyers. Please do not ask a court officer or anyone else to answer any questions concerning anything material to the case. Generally, we will not answer a question or take a verdict from 1 o'clock till 2 o'clock, but I think you've all waited so long to get this case, I think we can change that. But the court staff needs a luncheon break. You'll have lunch brought into you, and you can decide whether or not you want to stop your deliberations during lunch or continue and deliberate. At the end of the day, if you're still deliberating, I'll send in a note asking if you want to continue deliberating or break for the day and return the next morning. Don't tell anyone, including me, how the jury stands numerically or otherwise on the questions before you until such time as you've reached a unanimous verdict. You are going to notice shortly that the court officers are going to take an oath, and you will hear from that they too, as well as all other persons, are forbidden to communicate in any way or manner with any member of this jury on any subject touching on the merits of this case. Remember that the decision of the jury must be unanimous, and the foreperson should be certain that each member of the jury is in complete agreement with the verdict on each indictment. After the final vote of the jury, the foreperson should check the appropriate boxes as to each charge, then sign and date the verdict forms and notify the court officer when you've reached a unanimous verdict. You will then be brought back into the courtroom where the foreperson will deliver the verdicts. This will be the last time I'm going to see counsel at sidebar, but I'm required to see counsel at sidebar.
May I?
Yes.
Could the juror sitting in seat number 13 step down and take your place as an alternate? Could the juror sitting in seat number 7 step down and take your place as an alternate? Juror 6, could you step down and take your place as an alternate? Juror 17, could you step down and take your place as an alternate? Juror 2, could you step down and take your place as an alternate? And Juror 8, could you step down and take your place as an alternate?
All
Can I swear
right.
in the court officers?
Yes, please do.
Could I have the court officers raise your right hands? Do you swear that you will keep this jury in alternates in some separate but convenient place until they agree that you not suffer any person to speak to them, nor speak to them yourselves, nor ask them if they agree, nor suffer them to disperse until they have discharged their verdict, except by further order of the court, so help you God. Thank you.
All right, so members of the jury, I need not remind you that you have an important responsibility, but I believe that you will bring to bear all the wisdom and the judgment and conscience that you possess in reaching your verdict in this case. All that we can expect from you is that you decide the case with integrity and with principle. We all expect you to reach an impartial verdict dictated by your logic, without bias, without prejudice or sympathy, and not prompted by any facts except those that you've heard here in court during the trial. We are looking for impartial judgment dictated by your reasoning and the fullest discharge of your oaths as jurors. You may retire and deliberate your verdict.
Jurors, make sure you take your notebooks with you, please.
Was it juror number 5 that she selected as the foreman?
Yes.
And wasn't that the one they were worried about, or was that before they changed seating?
I have no idea.
Yeah, when I say that, based on what John was saying on the show.
I'm going to see counsel one more time.
Oh, another sidebar. Just for old time's sake.
Yeah, just for good measure. Have another one. Why not? We don't want to break stride now.
Alessi, this sidebar is just so I can hear you talk for one more time. So as Margaret has pointed out, and as we've pointed out at the last trial, in each court it's different. It's not just a state thing; it's a court by court thing. So in some courts, the juror is determined beforehand by the seat. So, for instance, the end of seat 1, or row 1, rather. But in Judge Cannoni's court, and in many courts in this state, it's chosen by the judge. Margaret was back, and now she's gone. So, I don't know if she wants to add anything to that. So, Margaret, your mic is not on. I feel like the Wizard of Oz commenting, and then she reacts, and we see it. So Margaret, so Judge Cannoni is the one that in her court she chooses the foreman. What information does she have? Is she just watching them? Does she also has the voir dire information? Does she have background information? What information is she using to make that
She
choice?
has all the background information, the jury questionnaire that the jurors fill out. That's what the lawyers have first during voir dire, and they look at them, see what jobs they have, your standard. And then I think she also watches which jurors are taking notes and paying attention. When I was on the jury, the 4-person who was selected on my jury was the one who actually took the most notes, I noticed.
Oh.
Yeah, it wasn't me. I did take notes.
The last time I was on a jury, there was one guy who was the quietest guy. So we had, most of us all of us got friendly with each other during the course of the week and just, having coffee together beforehand. And the juror that got selected was the person who was so quiet. He was like that kid when you graduate from high school and they call out the name and you're like, who's that? Where did that person come from? But it turned out this guy worked for Boston Dynamics. That's the company that famously makes those, to some people, terrifyingly real robots. So I always wondered if that was an accident, but now I know that judge probably knew that person's employment history or who they work for and stuff like that, and knew that this guy had a PhD in physics, and he turned out to be very good as a foreman too.
Wow. I actually have a good story. One of my friends, actually, who was engaged to somebody else, served on a jury for a while, and she broke off her engagement and married the other juror.
Oh, dang.
Wow.
Ouch.
It's true. It's true.
Wow.
Yeah. You never know.
Yeah.
There's
you
all
never
sorts
know.
of stories.
In the last case, the alternate juror ended up joining Karen's team. So
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So yeah, it's always long to have to listen to those long-winded instructions to the jury. It's just like, but they're important. But God, I wish they would shorten them a little bit, for the jurors.
they were really interesting, though, and I like the part where they talk about the inference stacking and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I do find that fascinating.
Judge, the first thing is counsel this morning and yesterday looked at exhibits, and I believe that we were pretty close. We had one exhibit that needed to be dealt with. Ms. Little, what number is that one again? 150? 155, and I'll let Ms. Little take it from there.
Yes, there's just one page, Your Honor. I believe, and my memory is not perfect, but I believe that we were going to have this redaction, subject to the same redaction from last trial. I think there's just one line here that needs to be redacted.
Okay, is the Commonwealth in agreement with that one line?
No objection. I believe it was redacted last time, so if the
Okay.
wants to make that redaction, you guys have it.
Great.
See that Sharpie and maybe I can see it.
I think we probably have one here you
I
can
have
have.
one. I definitely have one. So.
All right.
That's number one. And number two is, can counsel look at the verdicts and just tell me if verdict slips and just tell me if they're okay with it? Thanks.
You'll see that it's not what you provided me yesterday, Mr. Kennedy.
Does anybody know if they remember there was a big controversy last trial over the verdict slips? Have they substantially changed in this trial?
Well, I know the judge's instructions changed. She tailored her instructions a bit differently, and the actual slip may have changed. Obviously, they're working on it. Wait. Yellow cottage tail, but seat number 1, juror 5 is the one that slept and took no notes. Please don't tell me that's the one who's the foreper.
I do remember John talking about that, specifically mentioning juror number
not.
5. So that's why I was kind of surprised when I
Why
heard
would
that.
she?
But,
why would she do that unless she just picks that seat all the time? But that wasn't the case in my trial.
she didn't pick that seat last time. She picked someone at the end.
Why on
at
earth?
the end of the row.
I wonder is that the case?
Well, there also was some seat moving that went on during the trial. And so I don't know if John was talking about before the seat movement. So I'm not sure. I sent John the invitation. Hopefully he'll come in and
I know.
maybe clear things up for us.
I hope so.
John, if you're listening, come on in, man.
Counsel,
Need you to
keep
clear
doing
things
that.
up.
Mr. Rose?
Yeah.
Can you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that you will keep that jury in some separate but convenient place until they agree that you not suffer any person to speak to them, to speak to them yourselves, nor ask them if they agree, nor suffer them to disperse them, they charge their verdict, except by further order of the court, so help you God. Simply because you weren't in the room. Thank you.
Yes, the jury has left. The jury has gone into deliberations.
Mm-hmm.
You know that because that's when the camera goes up to the ceiling fan because they don't want they don't want the camera to pick up any of the jurors. Last year in the trial with the dismissed juror at the end, it accidentally picked her up because she came in late.
No, Karen looks pissed. I wonder what she's arguing with Jackson about.
Oh, someone said John is on Fox Nation at 3. So we're probably not going to get John.
Your Honor, I understand that you've rejected our proposed verdict slip.
So everybody else can sit down. Ms. Giannetti can stand.
Thank you. I understand that you've rejected our proposed verdict slip. Our concern with this verdict slip is that there are 4 options for, actually more than that, 7 options for guilty verdicts, 1 option for not guilty. And we're concerned that this is too confusing for the jury. So we are asking that there be not guilty options for each of the charges, including the offense charged and each one of the lesser included offenses. We really ran into the same issue last time. I think what complicates it is the fact that there are 2 theories for 2 of the lesser included.
Do you suggest that doesn't accurately reflect the law?
It does reflect the law. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it makes things very confusing.
Oh, God.
And that's why we believe that it cries out for some not guilty option. Given
I don't know if you were watching in the first trial, Margaret, but I actually, I didn't disagree with the defense that the jury form, and it's not that I was criticizing the judge because
So
apparently
your
this is
proposed verdict slip
a jury
did
form
not
that they've
cite
been
any
using for like
case
2
law. Do you have
centuries,
any
but I thought it
case
could have
law
been clearer too.
that
myself.
supports that proposition,
Yeah.
Ms. Giannetti? I have
You're
not
right.
found any. I've looked.
There's not a lot of case law out there in this verdict slip either.
Other than that has never been proven, has never been found to be inaccurate.
Not yet.
In fact, Vinny on court,
Not yet.
Vinny on court,
So
Yeah.
that's
Vinny on
fine.
court
So
TV
your
had
rights
said
are
the same
reserved.
thing.
Does
He
that
did-
help you?
Vinny on court TV didn't understand why it wasn't more clear too. And
Okay.
he came away with an impression like in
Okay.
this state we
Judge, the
do
last
things a little bit
If you find
backwards or something.
authority for that, let me know. Okay.
The last couple of things, judges, that we were provided with a clean
Laptop?
computer laptop, thanks. With a clean laptop. Defense counsel had a chance to, or at least defense had a chance to look at it, and I think that's fine. But
All right. So we'll send that in with the exhibits. I need to go edit my charge to fix all the typos.
And then the final thing is I was provided counsel with the exhibit list that we had, and it was satisfactory for both sides.
Great.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you.
All rise for the court, please.
So I'm not familiar with the verdict slip. What does it not say? What does it does say?
Whoops. What the heck? Is there music?
I don't hear
hear
music.
any on my end. Yeah.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, I'm not hearing any music now.
Can you
Yeah,
hear me,
I can
Kevin?
hear you, Dan. I can hear you.
All right. Kevin, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you guys fine. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
So what's the issue with the verdict slip that they had last year and this year? I wasn't privileged to last year's stuff.
You know, boy, I am going on memory, so I don't remember specific. What I do remember is thinking it could have been more clear. But I think the issue was some of the, and someone can come in and correct me, but that some of the jurors might have been confused into thinking they had to consider all of the charges together, 1, 2, and 3, and then come up with a unanimous verdict on all 3. Was that the issue, Margaret? I'm trying to remember now. And that's also
Yes.
before the SJC.
Yes. Yep. Because they didn't realize that they could come up with a guilty, for example, on the manslaughter, but a not guilty
Right.
on the OUI 2 and the leaving the
Right.
scene.
And
I'd like to know exactly what he's looking to change in the verdict slip, though.
yeah, we don't know.
Yeah.
I think
Perhaps
he wants
Alessi will brought in to elucidate us.
I know. Elucidate.
what it sounded like to me is that he wants the words not guilty or a box to be checked for the words not guilty for each charge
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
And that doesn't seem
Unreasonable.
no,
Right.
it actually makes sense. You know, I'm surprised.
So another. Go ahead.
I'm surprised the verdict slip already isn't like that in our state.
Right.
And it hasn't been raised before.
Another thing, I don't know if this is something, Margaret, that you think is
Yeah.
considered by prosecutors when they're doing this. So I think that you could make the reasonable case for second degree, and Hank made it very, very impressively. But you could also make but as you're strategically thinking of charging Karen, does it make it easier just to charge her with the OUI manslaughter? Or do they look at it like if you're adding the second degree charge as well? So let's say you're in the jury room and you've got an 11-1 where 11 of them agree with the manslaughter, and the 12th one maybe has just enough doubts where they're not comfortable giving the second degree. So there's a little horse trading. So they say, okay, we'll agree to just charge with the manslaughter. And so maybe that person who has, does that factor into strategic thinking, or does the prosecutor just go on what the evidence is? So if they think there's enough evidence, they feel an obligation to charge that and let the jury decide.
Yeah. So what usually happens is, let's say it's a case where you can charge, there's just enough for an indictment. Obviously, we have an indictment for second degree murder because we do have a dangerous act again.
Yeah.
But let's say it was a closer call. Some people think it is a closer call in this case, but I don't at this point. But it gives the opportunity for the jurors will also argue over second degree and then say, all right, well, we can't come to an agreement there. So, they'll fall back on the lesser charge, OUI manslaughter and then leaving the scene. That's often done purposefully because let's say you took out the second degree murder, then you have the most serious charge is the manslaughter and the leaving the scene. So then if there's a bait, they might go with the lesser.
Right. So
The
Kisses
scene.
is reporting, and so I can't
so
verify
that's
this.
very often.
So in chat is someone named Kisses is reporting that this ended up being 7 women and 5 men on the jury. I can't confirm that in any other way.
Well, I like women for this.
So does well, you have a woman defendant. You have a woman defendant too. Does that make it?
Yeah, but a lot of I guess it depends on who you talk to. A lot of my friends felt that she didn't have enough sympathy for O'Keefe. I mean, unless they were really in the other camp, they felt they didn't like her. A lot of women I know just couldn't stand her. It's so tough to say,
I know.
In this case.
It's funny. Sometimes we men have this unfortunate view where we think that men are more logical than women, right? But I can tell you that of the people that I have talked about on this case, the many people on the side, the ones, now maybe this is just my personal experience, but the ones who've been the most insightful and the most logical have all been women.
Okay.
I mean, all of them. So
a lot of
Kate
people
being
can't
one, but other people too,
Yeah, a lot of women are really bothered by her television appearances and she comes across callous and just, kind of looking for publicity and look at me. Women tend not to like that, I think, in general. Right. I found the difference between trial 1 and trial 2, where the television clips and appearances have just really turned her off to a lot of women friends that I have. Men don't I haven't gotten that much from men on the clips, but my women friends are just like, oh my God, she's a show off. She's overboard. She thinks she's all that. I think those clips, doing those TV interviews was the biggest mistake she made.
No, I agree there, 100%.
Yeah.
Biggest
mistake. A couple people had written me to say that of this opinion, that the experts and in their eyes ended up being a wash, and therefore it would come down to the clips and to Karen's behavior in court, I guess, too.
Maybe.
And maybe to the witnesses who described what they heard Karen saying. So things like that.
Was this before or after the closing arguments?
This was before. So this was after the cases were closed, but before this was last night, basically. So
yeah, so I feel like Hank did such a nice job tying everything together, and he was the last one to go. I would say the pendulum is now swung over to his side.
You see, for me, when it comes to the experts, what I took from it was that, from the Commonwealth side, is that John's arm would have been in position that, depending on the angle, could have caused the damage and been hit in that area. And I think that the defense did an excellent job showing that the arm could cause the damage to the vehicle in a very similar manner. And so to me, I thought the combination of the two were pretty good for the Commonwealth. Although I understand that the defenses wasn't to point that out. In the end, that's what it did. And, you know, her tail light broke in some form or fashion. And if the conspiracy is that she must have ran into something else, unless there's a floating arm, it must, you know, somewhere.
Yeah.
It's probably a person. And it probably happened during the time in which she's going in reverse at 70% throttle in those conditions under the influence of alcohol.
Just to answer Eddie Money's question, I don't know why Hank would want to bring up in closing arguments something that was his mistake. I'm not sure why. Why would you expect him to bring that up? By the way,
well, I guess Eddie's thinking about. I know,
right.
But it was addressed during Jackson's closing argument, so
it was,
Eddie
yes.
doesn't have that. It's not that bad of a question because in my mind, I wonder if he's going to say, hey, you know, like just one little tiny half sentence of, you know what? I did not perpetuate any fraud. I made a simple mistake.
Yeah.
I thought maybe he would do that, but
right.
Tough
Good point.
call.
I don't see how the jurors are going to overlook the text stream data, the debris field, and ARCA's video test example E, and then I guess stack on top of that the neurosurgeon. You put all that together, despite her bugging out her eyes and acting bizarre, I just think it's too much to overlook.
Yeah.
And the defense's case was like, you know, a jawless dog, fighting practice in a bar. Even if you're the kind of weirdo that thinks that looks anything like fighting practice, you're going to have to sell me on the fact that these cops who are savvy with, you know, I don't know, investigating crimes, that they would practice their murder moves before doing it on tape. I mean, it's
murder moves. I know.
It's bad enough you're trying to say that seasoned cops that you think would know how to get away with a crime, or at least better than the average person, would then just throw the body on their front lawn. You overlook that too. It's insane.
And apparently, if Dr. Lollapalooza was right, he had been dead for hours. You know?
Yeah.
Dr. Lollapalooza.
Right.
It's funny. Who said that? You, Kevin?
I can never get her name right, so I give up.
Lollapalooza. That's hysterical.
It's just nuts.
So it's funny, you know, as you're kind of like, you hate to like compare this to like a sporting event where you're scoring, you're changing the odds during the game, but there is that factor in your head. So after Disorga, I felt like the odds had improved. The odds were already good at that point in favor of the prosecution, and they improved substantially. And then I thought they went way up after Dr. Wolf because of those videos. Those videos that were just ended up being so powerful unintentionally for the prosecution.
Yeah.
But then the other two witnesses definitely helped the defense. And so by the time yesterday, I felt, you know, that the most likely outcome was a hung jury. However, I do think
I don't feel that way now.
No, I think right. I think it changed back for me today after those closing arguments. Really, they hit it out of the park so decisively that I feel much more confident today than I did yesterday in that we will get an actual outcome. And I would guess that would probably come Monday.
Are you on at 8 tonight in Court TV, Kevin?
Yes.
Me too. We've never been on together.
They always, but that's how they've teased us a few times before that. And
now.
Then you get moved to 9, which I'm kind of mixed. I actually like being on with. I love being on with Joe, and I kind of like being on with Nick too because I like the adversarial part of it. But what I would like about what I envy you for your slot is a lot of times it's just you and one other guest, so you have so much more time to make a point. Whereas I've got 3 chances to make a point in like 45 seconds to a minute, and it's so hard. You know, it's really hard to do that.
Yeah,
but that's all right. I'll take it. It's good practice. I'll take it for what it is. You know, it's.
A lot of people seem, at least in my chat, seem to struggle with the tail eye pieces and the injuries to John O'Keefe's arm. The way I took the evidence that that was explained wasn't so much that the explosion of the tail eye pieces and the force of those tail eye pieces going out is what caused the abrasions on his arm. What it sounded like to me and what Hank was trying to explain is that when John came in contact with the tail light, it shattered. Those shattered pieces fell into the tail light, because of the body of John O'Keefe's pressing down on it. And so they exploded out, but there was a moment there where John presses into it. And so if you were to imagine, if you had just pieces of tail light pieces that are shattered open and there's sharp edges around it, and you align those, and you don't have them going anywhere, but you just align them and some of them are sticking straight up. If you were to lay on them, wouldn't that cause you some injury, much less being pushed and forced into it in that moment? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. So actually, that was one point that I thought Hank Brennan did a good job, and raises. And I'm sorry, what Alan Jackson did a good job, and it raises some. It does raise some legitimate questions as to how you get, just from shards of taillight plastic, you get 6 wounds, each that has 3 parallel tracks, and they all collectively kind of are running in the same direction. It is kind of unusual how that would come from random pieces of plastic breaking off. And I had thought we would get an explanation that actually came from components of the taillight housing, but we didn't get that explanation. So I don't know. I think in some ways, perhaps, is it unfair to say that in some ways the state's accident reconstructionist Aperture maybe let down the state and made things a lot more difficult for Hank Brennan? For instance, why did Dr. Welcher, the main expert for the state, he didn't seem to know about this time drift thing, the time variance problem, until later on it had to be corrected. But he's the one that didn't seem to know about that. And the time that he reported was out of sync with the other evidence. And that's your main expert witness. And that's not Hank Brennan's fault. That's the expert's fault. That's Aperture's fault. I really think in some ways Aperture let the state down. What do you guys think about that?
In that respect, yes.
I mean, I think they were dealing with some components of an accident that they just could not recreate, because let's just say they would have gone in and done an experiment similar to what ARCA did, where they had a floating arm in the air and things of that nature. Then they would have been in cross hit with similar of what Hank was hitting ARCA with, well, do you know the body position? How do you know the body position? How do you know this? How do you know that? And so many other things. And he was going to have to say is, no, I don't. And it's impossible to know these things. And then they would have came in with, well, you can't prove there wasn't a collision because you can't prove the body positioning. And
that's fair, Dan, but how does that excuse the time variance thing, which they eventually later corrected? But the initial slides that Dr. Welcher put out had the time of collision as having occurred about 25 seconds before John last used his phone. And that there's no question they created that problem. And the problem was ultimately attributed to this time variance thing, which ironically the defense's expert DeSorga testified that is such the time variance thing is such a big issue that he has worked on it in over 1,000 cases. So it's a very well-known issue, but apparently it was not something that was well known to Dr. Welcher.
Sometimes some things are overlooked. I mean, we had a guy in the Bryan Kohberger case.
You're paying that kind of money. They're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars. Why are they overlooking something that everybody seems to know about? I don't understand. I think the Aperture really let them down.
No, I understand. And obviously the defense has a point to argue that. But in the Bryan Kohberger case, there's they have a defense witness called Cyrey, and he says that he's worked with AT&T for 15 years. And majority of their defense motions have been referencing some call timing advance records for Bryan Kohberger. And yet he missed the fact that there was only a 7-day retention time. Something that he was an expert. He's been an expert. He's testified multiple times. And this is something that he said that he's worked with AT&T for multiple years. In fact, I pulled up a clip of him talking about the retention advanced timing records on October of 2024. So before he even filed his motion. So it was well within his knowledge that the advanced timing records have a time period in which they are retained. And yet it was something that was overlooked. And I don't think it was something that was done on purpose in that situation. It makes him look like a fool, and the prosecution, definitely pounced on that. But I don't think at the end of the day that it was something purposeful. And I don't think it was purposeful in this situation either.
Right. Katie, you back behind the chair?
I am, yes.
I saw you came on, so I figured you were back by. So what is what I'm saying completely unfair? So I'm saying, just looking at the time variance issue alone, that Dr. Welcher, the chief expert for the prosecution, put that in his slide and didn't seem to understand the time variance issue, which DeSorga for the defense said he's worked on over 1,000 cases. So is it completely unfair for me to say, to some degree, this very expensive accident reconstructionist hired by the state let them down to some degree? Did you totally disagree with that?
I don't really agree. I mean, I think the time variance, from what I can recall of his testimony, he understood that there was a window. Like, he understood
By
the
the
basic.
end, but later on he did, yeah, but not when he first made that slide.
Well, we don't know that.
Well, he put it in the slide, so I mean,
Right, but I think he understood at that point that there was still a window, right? Like, it just wasn't tacked down, but they had Burgess, so he doesn't seem to be the data guy, right? He's not the data guy. They've got a data guy, and then you've got your reconstructionist.
Right.
And I
but
think
he's the guy putting together the main slideshow, so he really shouldn't put that together until he has everything exactly the way they want it.
Well,
Otherwise,
I think,
it becomes
I think that there was
problem.
always sort of a time variance understood, and that what disrupted that was when they came up with Desorga, who's kind of trying to throw more things to the wall to see what sticks. That prompts Burgess to then, apparently of his own initiative, investigate further, tack it down further, and then that gets to Welcher. I didn't think that was a big. I mean, I think that, again, there's expectations versus reality, and this is just how I took Welcher. I understood what he was saying, that, you know, if your expectation is ARCA and what they like, we're not going to do that because it's not honest, it's not reflective of the truth, it's not possible to do in a precise way because we don't have all this information. I can give you generals, like just like Hank explained it in closing, which is why I think it was such a beautiful closing. It's a tool. Welcher's a tool,
Yeah.
and I think probably the expense comes in more because of all that laser testing to debunk the.
As usual, we kind of see that confirmation bias in the chat. That if I criticize even the slightest way anything to do with a prosecution witness, chat erupts, and that's confirmation bias on your part. For people to say that I'm losing the forest or the trees just didn't matter, of course it mattered, because it was a main component of the defense closing argument today. So yes, it mattered. It should. So it you know, I'm not saying that this in any way actually creates reasonable doubt. No, I've already just said 5 minutes ago. You probably didn't hear this, Kate, but that I believe we're well into. So yesterday I believed that you were looking at a hung jury, but I believe that's changed today because of the strength of Hank's closing arguments. What I'm saying is their main accident reconstructionist made this harder on them, and that's really beyond what I just said is beyond dispute, because it was a key component of the defense argument today in closing arguments. So to say I'm missing something, no, it was a key component of their argument. So Alan Jackson, one of the most high-priced attorneys in the country, believes it might sway a juror. And if it sways even one juror, it could have a huge outcome in this case. So I'm not missing something. It was a mistake for those experts, the main expert, for the vice president of that company, to put that in there. It should have been anticipated. Their job is to create testimony for a witness, for the people that hire them. They should have anticipated that. It's a mistake. I don't think there's any other ways to view that. Is it, will it change the outcome? Only time will tell,
My recollection was that he addressed it with Hank and said that there was a sort of an industry standard accepted, and I forgot the time, and I've lost his comment, but the lady's name was Shah, S-H-A, brought it up and said 60 seconds. I couldn't remember if it was between a window of 30 and 60, but now seeing 60, I believe that
Burgess had mentioned 60 seconds, yes.
Burgess he said, right. So he says like it's an accepted industry standard time differential that's not usually explored any further. But because the defense started, because they're desperate, they're like, well, we got to argue anything we got. And they're not arguing text stream directly or the debris field or whatever. I think that compelled the further examination of it. So I get you bringing it up, and I could see that, like, that could be a mistake. I don't see it as a mistake, more of just an accepted discrepancy that had to be defended. So, but I mean,
and that was my impression as well. I think that, again, I think that of course they're going to, I mean, not for nothing, but we all witnessed Alan Jackson distort evidence and tell straight up lies in his closing. So I think they're going to try to seize on anything they can. But my interpretation of that whole situation is it's sort of a defense created problem with the intention of being able to exploit it. So, there's this understood time differential. Ooh,
right.
She hears him. Come here. There's this window that everybody understands, right? And it's industry accepted, and usually it doesn't go any further. The defense then raises the issue and tries to dispute it, which then prompts the prosecution witnesses to adapt to that so that the defense can turn around and go, haha, see, they didn't even think about this time differential. I
Right.
don't think that it's really, I think that again, that we're watching probably, I mean, some of Jackson's higher level strategy playing out. with some of this, you know?
Right. So you're,
Yeah,
you're right.
hat
To
tip
a
to
degree, we're
Jackson.
seeing exploitation. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Sorry,
hat tip to Jackson for making that move, to push for that. And I just want to say really quickly, it was Shaw Leary. I see the name came back up, so thank you for reminding me that it was 60 Shaw.
Yes, Burgess definitely testified that the industry standard was 60 seconds was accepted variance.
But I mean, to your credit though, Kevin, it like given the price tag, the ticket price on this, it's something maybe they should have done to anticipate, to kind of like make it a little bit more ironclad. I could see that argument as well, but I could just as easily see it as they didn't expect, because they've never in their experience had to defend anything more finely. So I
Well,
mean,
wouldn't any defense team exploit an opening like that?
Not
yeah,
necessarily,
you know,
because not every
so.
defense team would expend the energy, time, and money arguing over a couple seconds between your client backing up their car and somebody not moving forever.
Well, I think, but I don't think that's quite stating
Fair.
it accurately, because it's more than just arguing about a few seconds. You have the key piece of evidence was what time John last used his phone. And without that
Right.
time variance, that key piece of evidence has him using that phone after when Welcher said the collision occurred. So,
well, I don't think
that's why
Welcher
it's a
ever
problem.
Welcher never said when the accident or when the collision.
No,
occurred.
but the time, right? The time window, well, after outside of the window. I mean, just to be stated more accurately, outside of the window, he stated there was a window within which it occurred. So,
and I agree with you there, Kate, too. But I would say this, but this is trial 2. So I could see maybe the experts anticipating more of an aggressive attack on every little minute detail. So I could see that too. I mean, I think it's to explore it in conversation like this is awesome, because I can kind of understand both sides of the fence on that.
right. So actually, thank you, Boomer. And let's ask it this way then, one more way, and then we can move on to something different.
Sure.
If there is a third trial, don't you think that'll be cleaned up in the third trial?
I would expect it to be. Heaven forbid there's a third trial.
Right.
Yeah.
Which tells us it could have been cleaned up in this trial if things were done a little bit better. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
You know. So that's all. I'm not. I know people get upset anytime I criticize anything about anything on this side, but
that's how it goes, man. That's how.
No, that's why I like you. You're very objective.
Yeah, absolutely.
So wait,
You know?
Nothing wrong with
I'm not.
watching
I don't.
ideas.
I don't 100% understand the argument, and forgive me for not having the most technical sound mind on here, but the argument was that he used the phone and there's no margin of error or anything like that. And I guess with what Alan Jackson was referencing, but that the argument was, just so I understand correctly, that John apparently used the phone when they believed that after he had already been struck. Is that correct?
Yeah,
That's
Doctor. Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead. You can explain.
That's how they're trying to frame it, but I think they're really capitalizing again. Like the Commonwealth's case, if I were to sum it up, would be they're addressing what we do know, and the defense is trying to exploit what we don't. So essentially, what they're trying to do is build as much time as they can between Karen's car backing up, which again, that like everybody has across the board everyone agrees there is no data that actually pins down when the collision occurred. You know, the 5 seconds before she slams it in reverse and the 5 seconds after, but it's just as likely that the collision could have occurred in that window, or probably more likely that it did not. So we know that the collision occurred sometime after after 12:32:09, right? That's the last time he locked his phone.
Mm-hmm. And all of this is like exact. There's no margin of error or anything like that on any of this.
No, what it is Dan is Welcher, who is the chief expert to test it. He's the top testifier for the accident reconstruction. He's the vice president of the accident reconstruction company hired for this trial, and he created a window during which he said the accident happened, and he put a time on it. And the farthest edge of that window was, I think it was 12:33:38. No, I'm sorry, 12:32:38. I'm sorry, 12:31:38. Going on memory here, and
no, that's not 12.
Am I wrong on that? Right? So I think, but whatever the time was, outside of that window was Ian Whiffin's testimony at what time John checked what time he got out of the car based on the battery data, which came outside that window, and also what time he checked his messages, and then what time he turned his phone off. And so all of that happened outside of the window during which Dr. Welcher said the accident had happened. Now, if you had but what Kate is saying, Dr. Welcher put that out there, but he said there's a time variance, so between 21 and 29 seconds. And so if you add that variance to it, then now the window is grown enough to where those events now occur inside the window.
Right.
And then
you're talking about.
Yes.
You're
And then
talking about the
Burgess was
backup
actually able
maneuver.
to close that window even more. But yeah.
Yeah. Because I just, I've been preaching that, listen, the backup maneuver on the Lexus occurred between 12:32 and 4 seconds and 12:32 and 12 seconds. That's 8 seconds altogether. And O'Keefe's iPhone locked up at 12:32 and 9 seconds, and that's right in the window.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, fits
But I
perfectly.
think even that is like it's a strength for the prosecution that it does match up so well. But I don't even think it's necessarily that critical, because again, and I've said this before, we don't talk in seconds. We don't usually tell our time in seconds, right? 12:32 is. He got hit at 12:32. That's really all you need to know at some point in there. So I think that the defense is just trying to, wiggle out of it and go, oh, no. She started backing up her car at this time, and he locked his phone after that. And it's like, first of all, that's not.
That was Disorga, and I didn't. He was off. I thought he looked at the timestamps wrong. He was.
Also, just think about Hank. Think about Hank Brennan's closing statements. What word did he say more than any other word? Data. And how many times did he say the data does not lie?
Right.
So, I mean, he emphasized the data. So, it's important that this data be clear and accurate. And I just think Aperture made it a little tougher job for Hank. Like I said, these things will be, if there is a third trial, it will be cleaned up in that third trial. So, which tells us it could have been cleaned up for this trial. That's all I'm saying.
I don't think. Again, I think that all that stuff, it's not even really that necessary. The only variable here is the jury. I mean, and I know that Free Karen Read people don't want to hear this, and it upsets them, and they get mad, or they pretend that they think it's funny. But the truth is that when you look at this, any objective person that doesn't have any skin in the game, she did it beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just too clear. So I think all this extra little minutia stuff, that's not what's making or breaking this case at all. It's the jury.
Yeah, it's all up to the jury. You never know what they're going to do. Anybody find out yet who the foreperson is? Yet?
I believe the way I heard it, where they said 5, they said number 5.
But is
but
that
some people in chat are saying it's number 1.
It's African American guy who didn't take any notes.
Okay. And was he sleeping?
Don't know. I don't believe so.
Okay. I wonder what happens if you are sleeping. Does the bailiff come over and because if you're in court, like for a parking ticket or something stupid, and somebody falls asleep in court, if you're in the main court, the one of the bailiffs will come over and tap you, like, wake up, buddy. I've seen that.
I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
I'm surprised that she picked somebody who didn't take any notes. That blows my mind.
What's the responsibility of the foreman? I'm not, again,
well,
this
they
is
have
the
to
first trial I've ever
organize.
seen.
They lead the jury, so they have the same weight as everybody else in voting, but they say, okay, let's be it's got to be an organized person, in my opinion, and okay, so let's start with the first witness. What's his name there? Timothy Nuttall. And they might go right through that and say, okay, who has notes? How many, and so they're all going to be comparing notes. If this guy didn't take any notes, it's just kind of bizarre to me. I don't know. Why would he, of all people, be the foreperson?
Can somebody opt out of being it if he's like, man, I ain't taking any notes. I'm not.
Yeah, he could. He had the opportunity to opt out, but he didn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she kind of brought that up there too.
Yeah.
Because he right away accepted it.
Yeah.
So.
What about the other jurors? Can they, after a while, let's just say it's a week goes by, they don't like what he's doing as a foreman, can they change him?
Oh, they could ask the judge if he could be changed. Yeah.
Okay.
What do you guys think is a better way of doing it? The judge selecting the person or doing by the seat number? Because I can see the pros and cons to either way. So obviously the pro would be the judge gets to really select someone maybe that is a little more capable or a little bit more leader or a little more intelligent or something like that. But the disadvantage is it also gives the judge a chance to throw her weight beside one side or the other. So for instance, if you had someone here that was, I don't know, a firefighter or something like that, potentially that will be someone that's more likely to side with the prosecution here. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Or you could also tell if you're sitting up there and you're the judge and you're looking at the jurors, you can kind of tell if somebody's rolling their eyes. It's not that juror. Christina Rex posted they moved the jurors around. I don't know.
And Chick from the Bricks is someone who has
I
been
hope
very
it's not that jury.
helpful to us.
Good. Thank you, Chick from the Bricks.
She is someone that helped during and at the end of the first trial. I had put together all the data to create a graphic that showed that was very useful and about the timeline. And very similar to, actually, it came out to be so to the second, it came out to be accurate to what eventually was produced in this trial. But I'm terrible with graphics, so she took the information in the chart that I had and made it into a much better looking chart.
Good,
and,
thank you. Well, I hope not. Let's just put it that way. I hope not.
Yeah,
because I don't know. I mean, but you also don't want someone who might take over. So if I'm a judge and I'm watching jurors, I don't want somebody who's like so strong that they're going to like dominate. Like,
yeah,
like, would you want, I could name a few people that we both know, Kevin, who tend to take over,
That would be me.
Not you.
No.
I was just thinking about our court TV stuff.
Oh, you mean like Joe? Well, Joe's a lawyer. So that's
I
unfair.
love Joe, but like Joe would take over.
Yeah.
They wouldn't want, yeah.
Joe's been doing that all his life. He's
I know.
Obviously some of it's his personality. He has a super entertaining personality. You can see he would be the life of a party. But, he's obviously as a trial lawyer has had a lot of practice learning how to read the room, how to lead the arguments. As Hank would be in TV. When court TV, I'm sure he'd be like Joe in that role, maybe a little different, but.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. Much more hopeful than I was yesterday. I'm objective, remember?
Yeah.
I don't sound it, do I? I truly looking at it as objectively as I can. I truly believe Hank put it all together, put the puzzle pieces together nicely for the jury. And if they don't follow that, then who knows? Somebody.
The thing is before you even get to the all powerful and really bulletproof data, you can start with just the basic overview. You take a quick overview of the scene here. So you have the Lexus. The pieces from the Lexus were found in a debris pattern at the field at the crime scene, and it's found in a situation that is a recognizable debris pattern that people like Trooper Paul and other experts would recognize right away as a debris field. And then in addition, those pieces were later reassembled by criminologists in a state police lab in a way that they would match perfectly to Karen's Lexus and were matched perfectly to the Lexus. So that only leaves two options: either the Lexus backed into John, or somebody planted that evidence. Now, when you look at the main piece of evidence, the corner piece was found at 5:45 p.m. by the CERT team, buried at street level under 3 feet of snow. Now you get to, it's really difficult to imagine scenarios where those pieces could have been planted there. There would have been evidence of people trudging through the scene. And that's before you get to looking at the timeline, which shows that Karen's Lexus was either under surveillance video at John's house or in his garage earlier in the morning, or under surveillance video in her parents' house, or in the brief times that it was in motion, Karen was always within it, either driving it or as a passenger. So there was absolutely no time, unlike what Sue O'Connell says, there was no time to plant evidence ever, anywhere.
Kevin, do you think that did Hank stress that point enough that there wasn't any time to plant evidence? I know he talked about evidence couldn't have been planted, and he showed the photographs of Karen backing out of one Meadows, then they zoomed in. But did he go into that point that you and I talked about actually on my channel not long ago, that there just wouldn't have been enough time? Did he make that?
I think so.
point?
He did. He went. He
For
actually
some
went
reason,
in.
I can't remember that.
He mentioned the timeline, and he went into the timeline actually less specifically than I would have, but more specifically than I thought he was going to. So yes, that's why I really thought I can't think of anything that he really missed. I really can't.
I can't either, but I was thinking about our discussion and whether there was enough time between the Sally Port, the car arriving. We did the timeline precisely, and there absolutely was no time.
Yeah, no.
For evidence to be planted. And that's what convinced me. So I've got to go back and look at that little spot.
He was Nadia Comaneci, perfect tens all the way down.
I know.
I mean, he
All
really
from
didn't miss
memory
anything.
too. It's not. He doesn't.
Oh yeah,
he walks around. He talks directly to the jury. He must really connect with the jury. I can't imagine that he hasn't really connected with the jury.
I can't imagine either.
Yeah. No, that's definitely important. That's something that was hard for us to judge outside of the courtroom. Only people that were there that could watch the jury. So the court reporters.
I think Monday's too early. There's no way they're going to verdict Monday. Monday, yeah.
So isn't it more traditionally if there's on a murder trial? If there's, you can tell me if I'm wrong. But more traditionally, if there is a murder trial, you could potentially come to an acquittal very quickly. But if it's going to be a guilty verdict, even if they are able to determine that within a couple hours, they're going to take they feel a certain pressure to take the time before you're going to send somebody away to prison for life or for a very long time.
Yeah,
they feel a certain pressure. So that's what I think. Just based on my experience on the some trials that I've watched, they would always want to come back the next day. And
well, I mean, it depends because. So this applies across the board to all sorts of criminal trials. It could be your standard operated under the influence trial too. Sometimes if they come back right away, I don't know. It all depends. Like sometimes if they come back right away, like the time that my trooper said the car was blue and the next witness, another trooper said the car was red, they came back within 5 minutes with a not guilty on that OUI. But there's other times when they've been so convinced they've come back quickly with that as well. I've always worried that the longer they take, sometimes they're arguing over reasonable doubt, or you never know, really.
I feel like everybody always tries to read the tea leaves, and there's a bunch I've heard all
and then you just
of
can't. Yeah, like I said, some trials I thought it went perfectly. I thought, oh, this is great. I'm gonna win. And those would be the ones that I would lose. And I'd be like, what the hell? But the ones that went in like kind of, oh, I should have done that better. I should have done that better, would come right back in my favor. And just like weird stuff would happen. You never know.
So Joe, one of our moderators, asked a question. Can you please clarify what happens with YCT, so this channel, and jury deliberations? So, I mean, I don't know if Kate remembers. I'm not even 100% sure how we did it last year too. So obviously we're not going to be live continuously because we never know when something is going to come. So I don't know if you remember, Kate, how did we do it last year? I think we just kind of, we would come on. So let's say Monday.
I was down there for deliberations. I wasn't.
Oh, you were? Okay.
I remember I was down at the courthouse.
Yeah. So I'm trying. So I think maybe. So I'm trying to think now how we'll do it. So Monday morning, I would guess I would go live, and along with whoever's available on the panel that wants to come on with us early, and we'll see the judge come in and begin the day. And we'll see if there's any discussion things that come up, and then we'll go off the air, and we'll just try to monitor it and always be ready to come back on the air if something is going on. But like I said, I also do want to go over the Swedish nanny case. So I'm going to try to line up. I'm going to try to
send me
we'll work on
stuff.
that. I'm going to send you stuff and call you about it, and I'm going to see if this guest is going to come on and talk about that, and I'm going to see if he's available for Monday. And if he's not, maybe we'll do it Tuesday. And we might even do a show this weekend to kind of set it up a little bit. So we might be
cool.
doing a show talking about that. And then
Kevin.
Obviously we'll break into the Karen Reed case if something happens. Now usually a lot of times what happened last time, there were 3 notes from the jury. So we have to break in and see if is it a note or is there actually they've come up with a decision.
And then you can text us, and then we can hopefully jump right on. So I'll be around. I'm getting ready. I'll be around my home all week next week. I'm getting ready for my daughter's wedding shower that I'm throwing Saturday. So I will be right here cleaning.
Maybe we'll get Boomer on to play some music for us.
Yeah. That would be cool. Like verdict. We need to have a verdict watch tradition.
Yeah. We'll do whatever entertainment we can come up with.
I know. Hey, Kate, are you going to go back to the courthouse at all?
No, probably not this year. Too much drama.
Yeah, it was a little different last year because I think what Kate recognized, there was these huge mobs out there, and it felt like there was nobody standing up or sticking up for John's family because those mobs were very cruel to John's family, and Karen was, and Turtle Boy was coming out of court. So I think what Kate did was to try to organize some people to show there's another side to this. And, those mobs were the ones that were always getting on court TV and Law and Crime Network and stuff like that every night. So until Kate brought another side out there and people had a chance to hear from people, realized, no, not everybody in the public feels this way. There are people on the other side. So, and that was Kate that organized all that.
That's great, Kate. That's awesome.
It was necessary. I had some help. Lindsay was actually pretty instrumental in that as well. So credit where credit is due. But yeah, that was I don't know that it's necessary this time. There's all that Turtle Boy drama. It's just like it's not worth it. For what will hopefully be a just and swift decision here. And I don't mean instantaneous swift, but
Yeah, 3 or 4 days. Maybe 4 days. I'm thinking 4 days.
That's my guess.
Yeah.
And that is swift compared to the last few years. Absolutely swift. Yeah.
So there was another famous case from a couple of years ago, the Chesnick case, a cop that was shot by this guy, maybe had some mental issues, but also shot a woman just sitting in her window, elderly woman sitting in her window across the street. Jeez. And so in the first trial, there was one juror that held out, and so it ended up being a mistrial. And so they went to the second trial not very long later. And again, it seemed like there was going to be a mistrial. It looked like there was one juror that was holding out. But after, I think it was, if I'm going on memory, so I could be a little bit wrong, but after 4 or 5 days, suddenly they actually did come back with a verdict and it was guilty.
Right.
And that was Judge Cannoni too. That was her trial. Yeah. Yep. That was her trial. Everything interesting happens in that court from Sacco and Vanzetti on. It's amazing the history of that court.
Oh God, yeah.
I still have not been inside it. I've been outside it a few times, but I have not been inside that court.
Oh, it's a beautiful court.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that little area there, all the buildings, the historic buildings. I'm going to go in it and visit it sometime when there's no Karen Reed trial going on.
Right, no mobs. Right.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so do you guys want to call it a day, or you want to? Sure. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, we can call it a day. We're on verdict watch now.
We're on verdict watch.
So I have one last question for you guys. So what is it that how does the jury start off? Do they start off right now saying, all right, do we take a preliminary vote? Do we look at the evidence first? Like, what do you think is the first thing that they're doing when they go in there for deliberations?
So the judge, in her instruction, she warned them against going in and taking a straw vote. So it's always best if they don't go in and take a vote first, if they go over the evidence first and then take a vote. So that's usually what they're told to do. Whether they do it or not, no one knows. Right.
I did note that, and I'm curious as to what exactly they mean by a straw poll, because both times that I've been on juries, there was a temperature. I call it a temperature of the room vote. But
okay.
I don't know how that'd be different than a straw vote, but you go around
it's the
and
same
just let
type
everybody.
Of thing.
Yeah,
they don't want you doing that. Yeah, no, they don't want you to do that. And the jury instructions have always been that way. Don't take a straw vote because they're afraid everybody might just, I don't know, vote one way to, and be done. But they really want people to discuss the evidence, because there are times when some people didn't get a piece of evidence. Like there might be people on the jury that didn't really follow all the math with the text stream data and the timeline there.
And they might be swayed by if the 5 people in front of them, Yeah. So how would you think they would begin, though? To back to Dan's question, how would they begin?
I think they would begin with the first witness and go right through. go right through as much as they can. I mean, how else would you do it? Really, you can't imagine starting with the last witness, but I think they'll do
Actually,
it chronologically.
Now that I think about it, the last one that I was on, it wasn't so much. It was we did go in order around the 12 people in the room, and each person got to speak, not necessarily how they were going to vote, but just their overall impressions of the evidence. And
And didn't do it that
whether
way.
whether they spoke for a minute or 5 minutes, they each got to do it. But I definitely could see how after 2 or 3 witnesses, 2 or 3 jurors that would speak, and if they all spoke kind of similarly about the case, then you would get to that 4th or 5th person, especially if it was someone that was a little bit shy and doesn't like speaking in front of 12 people. I could see they were influenced by what they had just heard in front of them. Definitely.
Right.
You know.
Well, hopefully we get a just verdict and it's done swiftly, as Ricky would say. Let's see if we can get 2 birds stoned at once.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
well, Kevin, I'm still on for tonight.
Oh, good.
Let's see
So
who
did they send us topics? I don't even.
Yeah, they did. So
Let me check my
so
email.
for tonight,
Oh yeah, I got it
it's
too. Yeah.
the A block. Who is the final jury? Who is on the final jury? How the hell are we going to know that? Closing arguments, Lexus collision theory, closing arguments. Neither side in the Karen Reed trial called Michael Proctor to testify.
So
Who
you
are we
have
on
replaced
with?
Joe.
It doesn't say.
Margaret, not to put pressure on you, but you have replaced Joe.
Okay, so who is it? But I don't see the email where it says who's on.
I just hit reply all, and then it pulls up the names. So it's me, Nick, Rocco, Wayne, and you.
So it's you and me. Okay.
You've
Okay,
replaced
good.
Joe. You get to take on Nick.
Wonderful.
Nice.
You're taking on Nick
Nice.
too, though.
Just to let you know, they go to Nick. They're going to go to Nick first. They usually will sometimes go to Joe first because he gets a little deference because he's a lawyer, which I understand. But a lot of times they'll go to Nick. They'll definitely go to Nick before they'll go to me. And so there's pretty good chance. I don't know. Pretty good chance they'll go to Nick before you. And Wayne doesn't really nice guy, smart guy, but he doesn't really follow the case very closely. You know,
No.
so I don't think they really want to go to Wayne first. So I think they'll probably go to Nick first, and then to you, and then I don't know, maybe to Wayne, and then to me. That's the usual order. I'm like 4th person on the the pecking order usually.
And the smartest. You're the
No, well,
smartest.
not in their view because they use me.
You're very articulate, though. I mean, I told you I watched you last year when I didn't even know you guys, and I was very impressed.
So let's see. The A block is who is
Really
on the
was. I was one
final
of the
jury.
viewers.
So I'm looking at the topics. They usually
I don't know
change
who's on the
these by
final
anyways, but
jury.
How would we know that?
I haven't had
I
him
don't-
change my.
Probably because Karen Reed's team probably tipped off Vinny as to their impressions of the jury, and now they want to talk about it.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm
we don't. How do
cynical,
we
I'm
know anything
sorry.
about that? That's really
I'm
strange.
being
but not nobody's in court though. Like none of us, except for Nick Rocco, probably was.
Yep.
Right. B block, closing arguments, Lexus collision theory. C block, closing arguments, neither side in the Karen Reed trial called Michael Proctor to testify.
We've already talked about that.
I would have thought they'd keep it simple, like
Closing arguments all day long.
So-
I would do like I would have done A block.
defense closing arguments.
Yeah, defense closing arguments, and then B block,
B block
the
prosecution.
prosecution closing
Yeah,
argument.
that's what I would have done. Very simple.
And then not
the
even
third,
have a C block. Well, like whatever. Or,
Well, C block is the
can
third
be
segment, but you could, just have overall impressions of who you think's going to win. This is the proper,
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But who's on the final jury? I don't understand how that's.
Yeah,
I
the
don't
only
know what to
information we have,
say.
if even true, is 7 women to 5 men. That's the only thing, and we don't even. We're not even sure if that was confirmed yet, but we probably will know by then. But that doesn't really tell us much, anyways. There's not much. There's not enough material to talk about there.
Well, I guess what we could talk about though is, like we just talked about, is it better to have women or men on the jury?
I'm not touching that. No way am I touching that in front of a national audience.
I could touch that.
You can, I
know,
can't.
From
Yeah,
a
yeah.
woman's perspective.
Smart
Yeah.
man, Kevin. Smart man.
Thank you, Boomer. There's no way a guy, there's no way
No.
a white male
No.
dude can touch that.
No, deflect all day on it. No, I wouldn't. I'm
why?
with Kevin. I'm with Kevin on it.
Yeah,
I,
we'll just,
I can have opinions about men. Men can't have opinions about women now. Is that
it's
how that
okay
works?
for women to have opinions about men. It's okay for blacks to have opinions about white people. It doesn't work the other way.
I feel like
That's
that's
how
a
the
little sexist.
That's just the way of the modern world.
Is
So I
that
don't make
Kevin
rules.
being sexist, or is that Kevin being a realist about other people?
Yeah.
No,
being
I just feel like that if that's the
Right.
sentiment, I find it to be sort of.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
It's the way that I'm telling you, when you deal like with publishers, Kate, you're going to see in that industry, it's literally taboo. And Margaret went through this with one of her characters in one of her books, and I have too.
Ugh.
It's literally taboo for a white person to write about a non-white character. You cannot do it. Doesn't matter how.
No,
good
you
make the
can't do
character.
it, Kate. And I can give you
Well,
an
I wouldn't-
example.
I wouldn't feel comfortable with that because I would be really stretching my own perspective and making a lot of assumptions and presumptions, right? Like
Well,
that
this was different. This was a historical fiction that I was going to do on a case that occurred during the civil rights era. And the main character was a journalist from New York, and she was a woman who went down to the South to cover the civil rights, part of the civil rights trial, and she befriended a black woman, and they're, you know, it's about the friendship, and it's about, I couldn't even do that. Let's put it that way. They were like, nope, see ya, goodbye. Okay, so I didn't write the book.
And to be fair, and I don't want to speak for you, Kevin, but I mean, chime in. This isn't like a personal opinion. This is an observation on the realities of making any opinion in this, lack of a better phrase, this day and age. That's all, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I think like in terms of like, I mean, so you compare like, you know, I think, okay, first of all, asking the question, are men or women better on any jury is
Yeah.
it's a stupid question. It's a stupid question. Now, if we're looking at the context of this trial, I don't think there's anything wrong with whether you're male or female to really look at Free Karen Reed, who we've all observed for years now, and recognize that the demographic is strongly females over 35, right? Like that's
Right.
just so.
But
in
you
that-
could say that about true crime too.
I do think, though,
yeah, that's probably true.
I do think when it comes to this jury, though, that males can be swayed by attraction by a person who's not like Karen Reed's not an ugly person. And so I think a lot of her male attributors are attracted to that too.
I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
A lot of
Well, I
women's
was-
fans are all say, look how beautiful he is, and they know what clothing
Yeah.
she's wearing and stuff like that.
Right.
I don't talk about any of that. I just talk about evidence. You know,
Yeah.
as Jen says,
Yeah.
bricks and mortar stuff. I'm more
Right.
comfortable with that. And but no, just to affirm, so it's an awkward spot. But like I had a kid's book that I finished, a novel, and this was, when I say kids, it was like characters were in the 8th grade, so kind of in between that area, but they were old enough, you know. And there were 4 main characters, and the main character was a female girl. I mean, a 8th grade female, but the second one was black, and the people in the writers group, and they were Harvard professors, you know, all of them, like, you can't do that. You're a white guy. You just can't even do it. So you're saying that if I'm going to make this novel here, I'm not allowed to have a black character even in the group.
Right.
So I automatically have to make all these kids white. I can't, you know, and it's
Yeah.
just like, that's the rules of the modern progressive world. And if you don't,
Yeah.
you know, it's just, I don't write the rules. I don't like the rules. I don't agree with the rules. And it's a little
Exactly.
bit less. It's a little bit less
Exactly.
like that when it comes to gender, but it's not that much less.
And-
There's still a lot of that out there, you know.
So
And I
wait,
just
as a
wanna
woman, can I write about men, or is that not
Yes,
acceptable?
you
Yes.
can.
Well,
No,
I
just-
write,
Yes,
yeah,
you can.
I write in
Just-
the
just-
man's
just-
point
oh,
of view
right.
in fiction.
Just
So
like a
yeah.
black person can write about all the whites they want.
And I just want to
It's
nod
okay.
to Jay Daw here saying, I think it's a weird topic. And it's a weird situation. And it's not, we're not stating like myself that I believe it's wrong for a man to, opine about what,
Right.
a female demographic may think. I don't think it's wrong. I don't think that's what we're discussing. And maybe there's a bit of confusion there. It's more that Kevin is aware of the social climate we're in right now and how easily that can be attacked. Right. It's not an indictment on Kevin, or like Kevin thinks, that men can't have opinions or whatnot. That's not the discussion. So and it is ridiculous. I saw Caroline Crochet's Grannies said, yeah, until we stop playing race cards, etc., society won't progress. I agree. It's all ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
I'm in agreement. So
unfortunate.
Also, they actually gave me a reason in the group, at least in terms of the race issue, but this would apply to the gender issue too. What they said was that if you're from the white society, you could never understand what it was like to be from the oppressed minority out of power part of society. And so that same logic would apply to gender. But again, I think we're all in this. Me, you, and Kate, and everybody in this could easily have this discussion, and none of us would be have a problem with it. We're all, but we're talking about in that larger world. You just don't want to touch it.
In the larger world of today, as it sits right now, it's very tenuous and strange. And I agree, it shouldn't even be a discussion. We should all just be human beings about everything we're talking about. And I agree with that. I absolutely do.
I just reached out to John DePietro to help us
My
tonight,
king of
Kevin.
kings,
I mean,
yes.
because like I just said, who made the final cut as far as, what's the makeup of the jury? I want to know about their gender, their age, and who that.
I don't think that's going to
is.
end up remaining. They do change these topics all the time.
I
And
don't
when
like the
something is
topic.
when something is a bad, like when we can see that something is a bad topic, they do these. So what happens is Vinny and the staff gets together for a 3:00 meeting, and this is all done very quickly. And I think they come up with this stuff. They're not sure what topics to do either, but it generally changes by the time of the show. And so you got to be kind of ready to but we can kind of guess what it'll be because it's going to be based on what we just seen in the last 2 days in court.
Oh yeah,
So,
but I love the idea of spending an entire block on the defense and then entire block on the prosecution and the last block on overall thoughts. I think that's brilliant.
I mean, we just saw today. You're never going to see. You might never see this again in your life. Two of the best, high-powered, famous lawyers in the country going head-to-head in a case. And listen, I know how all of us feel about Alan Jackson's closing argument today.
But he
because he twisted things. But
yeah,
based on what he had, it's hard to imagine him doing a better job. Based on the hand he was dealt, he took all. I mean, he took everything and twisted half-truths into truths and distorted everything. But as a performance, it was brilliant. As something that gave his client a chance, it was absolutely brilliant. And then we saw Hank that hit it out of the park. So we just saw two masters of their trade go up against.
Yeah, we did.
And it was just
we did.
It was that should be the topic tonight.
DePietro wasn't in court today. He just texted me back. He'll be there Monday.
Right. But he may have some observations about juror number 5 if that wasn't one
we
of the
don't know
people
who
that had their seats moved or something. Yeah.
He said he might know later today if that's still the topic. Well, anyway, I've got to get going because I haven't eaten. I have no food in the house. Karen Reed has caused me to have. I actually ran out of coffee and toilet paper, so I've got to go to the
Oh my
store.
God. You're having flashbacks to the lockdown. That's no good.
I know.
Those two things go together.
They do.
Right.
I've got to go to the store big time, like now.
Oh, man.
Well, thank you for being here. That gives us a
loved
perfect
it.
jumping point to end this. And so everybody, again, for everybody that's filled in, especially Kate, who's been running much of the show during this trial, she's done a great job. And look at the numbers today. We were almost at 1,600 at some points. Maybe
That's
we even
amazing.
hit. We might have even hit it when I missed it.
Oh, you went on there because I mean, overall, we are well over 12,000 right now.
That's wonderful, you guys. Congratulations.
So thank you, everybody. And, the new stars of the panel this year, Boomer, who was added to it, and Dan and Margaret. Kate's been with us since last year. And we don't have Jen Coffin-Affer here at the moment. I don't know if she was on this morning.
Yeah.
I think she was early this morning, right? No.
She hook up her channel, but she's probably busy today. So
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, she's
And
usually on.
And we haven't seen Matt this week too much, but
No.
all right. So, but thank you, everybody. Everybody's done a great job. I really appreciate it. And I think the public has had nothing but positive feedback, and they really appreciate the diverse opinions. And it's been good. So thank you, everybody. And so we'll be back on Monday for sure. And we may do something this weekend. I'll let everybody know if we do.
Yeah.
Sure.
We'll be in touch.
Let me
All
know.
right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. We'll have a
Thank
good
you.
weekend. Enjoy the
Thank you, Kevin.
beautiful weather.
You too.
Right.